משמריך, יאר השם פניו אליך ויחונקה, יישא השם פניו אליך, יישא השם פניו אליך, וישם לך שלום, שלום. יברך לך השם וישמרך, יאר השם פניו אליך ויחונקה, יברך לך השם וישמרך, יאר השם פניו אליך ויחונקה, יישא השם פניו אליך, יישא השם פניו אליך, ישם לך שלום, יברכך השם וישמרך, יאר השם פניו אליך ויחונקה.
מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נדר בקודש. מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נדר בקודש. משה ובני ישראל, לך אנו שירה בשמחה, לך אנו בשמחה רבה, ועמו כולם. אז ישיר משה ובני ישראל את השירה הזאת.
מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נדר בקודש. משה ובני ישראל, לך אנו שירה בשמחה, שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים, אוי מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל יתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך, הנה לא ינום ולא ישן שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך, יומם השמש לא יככה וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך מעתה ועד עולם. שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים, אוי מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם בארץ, אל יתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך, הנה לא ינום יד ימינך, יומם השמש לא יככה וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך מעתה ועד עולם.
Okay, welcome to this week's Torah study. This is Hakham Melech ben Yaakov of the World Alliance of Qara'im. And this week, we get down to the nitty-gritty. Parashat Mishpatim, which is basically a bunch of laws. And we can ask ourselves the question, what do the laws in the Torah mean? There are a lot of, I'll take care of it in a minute. There are a lot of different opinions about that. So some people, like I used to hear in rabbinical yeshivas, would say that the laws of the Torah cover everything, that every possible law is written in the Torah. Then, of course, they would contradict themselves by saying that we also need an oral Torah to flesh out the written law, because you can't figure out the written law. So really, let me just turn the music off. So really what they mean is that between the written law and the oral law, that every possible situation is already covered in the Torah. Let me just put my face there. No, that's not my face. There we go. So that every possible law in the world or every possible situation is, unbuckle this, I look like a priest or something like that, is covered in the Torah. Okay, but that's ridiculous. That's too simplistic. In other words, what the rabbis really mean, and it's always incorrect to say the rabbis and what they mean. There are so many different rabbis who mean so many different things, and the movement, the rabbinical movement, as any movement is complex. But the general idea that I used to hear in yeshiva is that the written law plus the the oral law, or at least the rules for extracting laws using techniques which are part of the oral law, those two together cover every situation. So if you have the written law plus you have these techniques for extracting laws from the written law, and those techniques are well, there are different lists of them. So now I have to remember the exact ones. There's Rabbi Eliezer, there's Rabbi, I have to go back. It doesn't matter. There's different lists. I think Rabbi Ishmael, Rabbi Eliezer, these different techniques for extracting laws from the written law, that this together somehow covers every possible situation. That's, of course, ridiculous, as Karaites, or certainly this Karaite, does not believe such a thing. And to explain what the Torah really is, what the written Torah really is, I'd like to quote, or shall I say paraphrase, because I don't remember the exact quote, a professor named Joel Baden. He's a professor at Yale University, and he has a nice a couple of online series dealing with the Old Testament. I don't agree certainly with everything he says, because basically he believes in the documentary hypothesis, but he has a lot of very, very brilliant insights. He would make a great rabbi if he ever came over from the dark side to the light side, or a great Karaite Hakham, better yet. But at any rate, he has a quote where he says that the Torah is. Someone asked the question: Is the Torah? I'm trying to think of the exact word he used now. Is the Torah illustrative? In other words, the laws in the written Torah are supposed to illustrate, certain modes of thinking. And his response was something like, "Yes, they're at best illustrative." Right. So the idea is not that the written Torah covers every possible situation that could arise in the world. It's not possible. It's absolutely not possible. Okay, of the way that certain laws are carried out, and those laws are meant to serve as basis points, or let's say, as basis points is the wrong word, as a basis of points for how to think about extracting laws on a case-by-case basis, which is done by whom? It's done by the judges. Okay, so let's take an example. We're going to read about a law where it says, I don't know, do not hit your mother and your father. Okay, so what does that mean, right? If a 3-year-old, or if you hit your mother and your father, he who hits his mother and his father shall certainly be put to death. Okay, so does that mean if a little 3-year-old goes up and says says, "Mommy, I want chocolate," and the mother doesn't give him chocolate or her chocolate, and then the 3-year-old starts saying, "I hate you, Mommy," and starts pounding on her leg or something like that, should that child now be put to death? Right? Obviously, anyone with common sense would say no, or else there would be no children left in the world. So that's a case where where judges who are supposed to be wise men. We saw instructions in Parshat Yitro in last week's Parsha on how to choose out judges. Right? They're supposed to be God-fearing. They're supposed to be wise. They hate betzah. They hate bribery or graft. Right? So wise men are supposed to examine the individual situation of the case and make a determination based on the specific situations of that specific case, right? So I'll play judge for a second. Okay, someone comes to me and says, okay, this 3-year-old hit his mommy on the leg a couple times because she wouldn't give him chocolate. Should he be put to death? I think about the case for a second. Yes, it does say that anyone who hits his mother or father should be put to death, but really that doesn't apply here, right? Common sense would dictate that it doesn't apply here. So let's see, what should the punishment be? You should take the child home. First of all, I think if I were judging the case, I would say, it's not really my business. You deal with it as you see fit. Okay, but if you want me to render what a punishment should be, okay, so the kid shouldn't get chocolate for a week and he should get a spanking. Okay, that's it, right? So that's the idea of the written laws of the Torah. The written laws of the Torah are kind of like these. It's almost like the Constitution of the United States, right? We have the Constitution of the United States, which has laws written into it, right? But they don't cover every possible situation, and that's why legislature is set up. That's why a court system is set up, right? This is supposed to translate the underlying principles of the Constitution of the United States into day-to-day law. And if the judges are wise and do a good job of this, then they will exemplify, or they will project the intentions of the wise founding fathers of the United States onto the day-to-day laws of the United States. And if they're a bunch of corrupt fools, as they are in this day and age, then they will distort the underlying, or the original meaning. I won't say original; that's already a loaded word when it comes to the Constitution. But the underlying meaning and intentions of the founding fathers of the United States, and turn the whole place into a cesspool, which they have done. It's the same with the Torah, right? So the Torah has written laws. They're meant to be illustrative. They're meant to be like I had a fellow Hakham friend who always used to say that the Torah is like the Constitution of Israel. As the Constitution is to the United States, so the Torah is to Israel, right? It's meant to show the basis of law for Israel, but it's certainly not meant to be exhaustive. It can't cover every possible situation, and it's not meant to cover every possible situation. It's meant to give a kind of bullet points as to some important laws and how to think about adjudicating law. And then judges are meant to be appointed who are wise, God-fearing, Sonei Betza, hating graft, etc. And they're meant to carry out the day-to-day laws of the United States. Of Israel. And so it's very, very important to keep that in mind. It's very important to keep in mind the structure or the rubric for when we're reading laws in the Torah, that they're not meant to be the be-all and the end-all. They're meant to be bullet points for wise judges to base their decisions off of, and for the nation to understand the general idea of how to live. And they're certainly not meant to be exhaustive. So when Professor Joel Baden, again, I highly recommend checking out his playlist. In fact, let me see if I can find it, and maybe I'll paste the link or so. One or two. I've been listening to another series of his lately. So let's see, Joel Baden. Very good, very insightful kind of guy. Of course, I don't agree with his basic idea. He's not. I don't think he's definitely not a believer in the divinity of the Torah. That's for sure. But let's see here. All right. Well, this is his main one. But here's let's see, Genesis. This is a series I've been looking at lately. So let's see if we can get a playlist. A link to the playlist. Well, I'll give the link to the first one. So check it out if you want. It's pretty interesting. Copy. Let's do this. Let's paste it up here.
Whether it has been precisely copied from its
yeah. So if you want to check out his playlist. Okay. Let me get rid of this. So and so the rabbis also understood this was a problem, right? They understood that the Torah is not exhaustive. The laws in the Torah cannot describe every possible situation that comes up, and they needed to describe day-to-day cases, right? So what did they do? They came up with this lie of the oral law. The oral law is basically the rabbinical fleshing out of the written Torah, but they lie, and they say, some of them lie and say that it comes from Mount Sinai, and that the oral law was given at the same time as the written law, or at the very least, the laws for figuring out the oral law, such as Kal V'chomer, Gezerah Shavah, all of these kinds of things, and the various lists, as I mentioned, for fleshing out oral law from written law, were given also at the time, or given to Moses in the time of Mount Sinai, and their rubric for fleshing out written law into oral law makes them come up with some very, very strange laws, and that's why the rabbinical movement is so distorted and such a distance or such a distortion from, in my opinion, the way the Torah is meant to be understood. So all of this is prefaced to say that when we are now going to be going into, starting in Exodus 21, which is Parshat Mishpatim, okay, we're going to be getting a whole bunch of laws. And it's important to keep in mind that this is in no way meant to be exhaustive. Again, to quote this professor, Joel Baden, when someone asked him, are they meant to be illustrative? I think that's the word he used. And his response was at best, right? So they're meant to be bullet points on certain important laws and illustrative as to how we as Israelites are supposed to understand our day-to-day life, which is ultimately supposed to be fleshed out by judges. And let's take a look at last week's Parsha and look at the requirements for judges. Hold on one second. Well, the fish is ready, so I'm going to get food over there. Okay. I'm sorry. Excuse me for 1 second. Okay, I'm going to get you on a plate over there. Here, should be delicious. Make it, put it. Add herbs or something to it, but I can't right now because I'm in the middle of this stuff. All right, but it should be delicious. It should be absolutely delicious. Okay, sorry about that. So, right, we're talking about the judges, and let me share my screen a little bit differently so we can start looking into the text. Window, Torah. So we saw in last week's Parsha some of the requirements for judges. And where was that? That's Exodus 17? No, 18. So Jethro, Yitro, advises Moshe and tells him to seek out judges, right? That he can't be sitting there in front of the nation all day long. He's gonna wear himself out, and he's gonna wear the nation out by doing such a thing. So listen to my voice, blah blah blah. It's a hobby. Where is it? Here we go. Verse 21. So this is 18:21. We ata tehze Mikol ha'am anshe hayel yira'e Elohim anshe emet son'e ba'sa وصمت عليهم سري ألفيم سري مئات سري حمشيم وسري سرot. And we'll get to the next verse afterwards. So Jethro is advising Moshe, seek out from among the people anshe chayil, valorous or perhaps brave, or go with valorous men. Yirei Elohim, God, those who fear God, or God-fearers. Anshe emet, men of truth. Sonei betza, sonei basa, haters of bribery or graft. Okay, so those are the 4 qualities in the judges that Moshe is to seek out from among the people. Okay, once again, valorous, God-fearing, men of truth, haters of graft. V'samta alehem sarei lafim sarei me'ot sarei hamishim sarei asarot. Basically, you put them over the people. And verse 22. We shaftu et ha'am michol aith وحيا كل הדבר הגדול יביאו אליך וכל הדבר הקטון ישפטו הם והקל מעליך ונשאו איתך. So they shall judge the people b'chol eit, at all times, meaning on a regular basis. And anything that is too great for them, too great for them, they shall bring to you. And anything that is not too great for them, that is small enough for them, they shall judge. And so they shall lighten the load from off of you, and they shall help you carry it. Okay, I'm paraphrasing there, but I prefer a little bit of a paraphrase to a word for word, which just sounds kind of dry and incorrect. Okay, so so that's the idea. Okay, so there's a hierarchy here. At the top of the hierarchy is God himself, is Yahweh. Okay, he's the ultimate judge. Okay, if anything is too great for the judges, the smaller judges, to figure out, then they bring it to Moshe. If Moshe can't figure out himself, then he can ask God, as he does a number of times, such as in the daughters of Tzalafchad, in the case of the Nokev B'Shem, the person who blasphemes the name of God. In the case of the Mikoshesh Tzim, the person who gathers wood on the Shabbat. These were all cases where Moshe had to ask God what to do. Okay, so God is at the top of the hierarchy, and as long as we have prophets, then we can communicate with God directly. I guess we could also use the Urim V'Tumim, but it's understood that really the Urim and Tumim were not used to solve cases. They were more used to lidrosh et Elohim. They were more used to, although lidrosh et Elohim is actually used in this parsha to mean seek out God in terms of judgment, but it was more along the ideas of should we go out to war, should we not go out to war, who should go out to war first, etc. That's what it's believed, although nobody really knows. At any rate, I digress. So there's a hierarchy. God, then Moshe, who was basically the judge at the time, and then we go into the book of Judges, and there were different judges at different times, Gidon and Othniel and Yeshua, and all these different people, right? Samson, Shimshon, etc., Devorah, right? So that's the main judge. The main judge is in theory a prophet. At least until the time of the kings, the main judge was almost always, I think, always a prophet. Although I think Shimshon was never technically a prophet. So that main judge, Moshe in this case, can communicate with God. God can give judgment if necessary. If it doesn't have to be kicked all the way up to God, then Moshe can figure it out on himself and by himself. And if Moshe doesn't need to figure it out, then these other judges, this hierarchy of judges, can solve the cases for themselves. Okay, now it speaks about a hierarchy here because it speaks about Sarei Alafim, Sarei Meot, Sarei Chamishim, Sarei Asarot. So basically rulers or we'll go with rulers over thousands, over hundreds, over 50s, and over 10s, right? So that would imply a 4-level hierarchy if that's to be taken literally. So then it would be God, Moshe, the rulers of thousands, the rulers of hundreds, the rulers of 50s, and the rulers of 10s. Okay, so that would be 1, 2, and then 4 more. So 6-level hierarchy, including God, right? But we don't really see this in the rest of the Torah. We see distinction between the judge, Hashofet asher b'sharecha, the judge that is in your gates, meaning the local judges. You could think of this as the local district courts, and versus the judge that is in the place which I shall have my name dwell. Okay, the judge that is basically up in the temple, ultimately in Jerusalem. Okay, so it would seem that the rest of the Tanakh plays out a 3-level hierarchy: the local judges, the main judge, and then communication with God himself. At any rate, we have this hierarchy, and these judges who have these qualities of being God-fearing, of being valorous men, of being men of truth and haters of Betzah, of graft, they're supposed to use their wisdom and flesh out the cases based on what they learn from the written Torah, but not that it's exhaustive or illustrative. It's at best illustrative, again, to quote the professor that I mentioned before, right? It's the wise men are supposed to take the underlying principles of the Torah and apply them using their wisdom in day-to-day life. And we actually see this in the case of King Solomon when he first takes the throne, right? And he wants to, he prays to God for wisdom, and then God grants him wisdom, and then he has the case with the 2 prostitutes, one each of who have a baby, and one dies, and then they bring the remaining baby to King Solomon, and each one claims that the baby is his, and King Solomon says, cut the baby in half. You all know the story, right? King Solomon did not read the Torah. It doesn't say anywhere if 2 prostitutes come to you and they've each had a baby and one dies, and they bring the other one and they each claim it's theirs, pretend to cut the baby, say you're going to cut the baby in half, and then the real mother will protect the baby even if she doesn't get it herself, right? King Solomon didn't read that anywhere in the Torah, and he certainly didn't use the oral law I have to get the lists now because I'm forgetting it. So we'll be looking at hermeneutics. Oops.
Were they really prostitutes?
Yes, they were really prostitutes. It says Zonot.
What kind of prostitutes?
I don't know.
Religious ones? Is the word zonai?
I think it uses Zona.
Is that word, does that refer to religious prostitutes or just
Well, I'm not going to go into it right now. I think it uses the word Zona, and that does not imply religious prostitutes because the word for religious prostitute, if it even means that, would be Kadisha. Okay, at any rate, so here we have the 7 rules of Hillel, the 13 rules of Rabbi Ishmael, the 32 rules of Rabbi Eliezer ben Jose, Yosef HaGalili. Well, I got to do this now, okay? I'm in the middle of a Torah study. All right, we'll talk about it later. So there you go. So these are rules for translating written text into law, but this misses the whole point. You can't use these. You can't use a set of rules because that defeats the purpose. King Solomon certainly didn't use any of these rules. He just used his wisdom that he was granted by which he was granted by Yahweh, which he was granted by God. Okay, so all that being said, we can start digging into the laws in Exodus 21, always keeping in mind that we are talking about not laws that are meant to be taken always 100% literally applied in all situations, as actually the rabbis do a bit too much. As I've said for years and years now, it's ironic that the rabbis say that the Karaites over-literalize the Torah, when in fact it's the rabbis who 9 times out of 10 are the ones over-literalizing the Torah. But not to take all these laws as open and shut cases, but as basis points for wise, God-fearing men of truth who hate graft to use as a basis for fleshing out cases on a day-to-day basis. I think I've used the word basis about 5 times in the past sentence. Oh well. Okay. Any questions? Any comments before we go on? Anybody want to say anything? Yes, no, maybe so. Going once, going twice. Gone. All right. So here we go. And again, just to get a little bit of context, the previous chapter, Exodus 20, was the 10 Commandments. You guys have all heard of that one, I think. And then the people don't want to hear God anymore. It's too much for them. And then we get a couple of laws here. And in fact, I think I'm going to start here because this is, in a sense, well, it's kind of refreshing of I guess it's not really exactly the same, but we're going to start here just to get a little bit of context. So this is the end of the 10 Commandments. The people tell Moshe that they don't want to speak to God directly anymore. It's too much for them. It's too frightening for them. It's too overwhelming for them. Moshe agrees. And we'll start here in Exodus 20:22. Yomer Yahweh el Moshe, Ko Tamar el Bnei Yisrael, Atem Ra'item, Imin Ha Shemayim, Dibarti, I Mochem, Lo Ta'asuniti, Elohe Chesef, We Elohe, Zohav, Lo Ta'asu Lachem. So Yahweh said to Moshe, Ko Tamar el Bnei Yisrael, so you shall say to the children of Israel, you have seen that I spoke to you from the heavens. In other words, God is pointing out that you've seen, I spoke to you directly. Okay? Lotasun iti Elohe kesef, do not do with me, and I'll explain what that means in a second, but I'm going to translate it literally for a moment. Do not do with me Elohe kesef, Elohe zahav, gods of silver and gods of gold. Lo ta'asu lechem, do not make for yourselves. Okay, so what does it mean with me? It means this idea that God is not going to share his throne with any other gods, real or imaginary. And when I say real or imaginary, of course, there are no other gods, but there are people and peoples who believe that there are other gods. So from their perspective, there might be they might believe there are other real gods. Let's look at the Hindus, for instance. I always like to point out that I used to go to this Indian restaurant. I won't say where. And every time I went to the Indian restaurants, I would pass a statue of Ganesh, which is a big popular Indian god these days. Apparently, he wasn't in fashion 50 or 100 years ago, but now he's big time. And it's usually portrayed as an elephant with many arms. and I always just and this is an outright idol, and I used to spit in its face when nobody was looking.
The new one a few decades ago with his daughter,
His daughter. Now he has a daughter. What's his daughter's name?
Santoshima.
Santoshima. Okay. Well, congratulations, Ganesh, on the birth of your daughter, Santoshima, in the 60s or 70s. Anywho, all right. Neither here nor there. At any rate, God does not want to share his throne. God does not share his throne. Yahweh does not share his throne with anybody. Okay. And I think the point of this is, so here we have the 10 commandments, right? Do not steal, do not murder, etc., etc. At the bottom, one of those commandments, is rehashed, is fleshed out again. And which is it? It's basically commandment number 2, that you should have no other gods, right? Lo yelecha Elohim acharim al panai. You can say 2 and 3. Okay. This is the only one that's fleshed out again. Okay. When God wants to reiterate, I spoke to you. And what's the most important thing I told you? Do not worship idols. Okay. And the Tanakh certainly bears out the fact that idol worship is considered the most serious sin in the Torah. Okay. On the same level, if not worse. It's horrible to say, but actually, I won't say it's horrible to say. It's maybe a little bit surprising to say, but it seems clear that the rest of the Tanakh would bear out that the most serious crime in the entire Tanakh, worse than murder, which is a close second or maybe equivalent, but I would say close second, is idol worship. That is the worst thing. This is the worst crime. This is the worst sin that you can commit against God, is to worship other gods. Okay. It's always a slippery slope. Once a society turns to idol worship, then all of the rest will follow. As sure as night follows day, once a society turns to idol worship, you can be assured it's only a matter of time before it's a cesspool of violence and murder and theft and sexual vices and any of the other horrible things that are mentioned throughout the Torah. I got to do this now, folks. All right, we'll talk about it later. All right, so now we're in verse 24. מזבח אדמה תעשה לי, וזאת ועדה עליו את עולותיך, ואת שלומך, את שונאך, ואת בקורך, בכל מקום אשר אזכיר את שמי, אבוא אליך וברכתיך. Okay, so mizbeach adama, you're going to make an altar of dirt, okay? And later we're going to find out that it either has to be an altar of dirt. This is in Leviticus. It either has to be an altar of dirt or it has to be an altar of stone that is not gazit, a stone that has not been quarried. It can't be cut with an axe or with a quarrying tool. Okay, it has to be natural stones. So why? We'll talk about that when we get to Leviticus. It may have to do something with humility. Okay, in the case where it prohibits cut stones to be used, it speaks about not wielding a sword against the stones. So it may have to do, with a polemic against violence, against war. In other words, this is meant to be a kind of humble, natural, shall we say? That word doesn't describe that much, but we'll use the word natural for now because we're not going to get into it now. Altar. Okay, so here's laws about the altar. So you're gonna sacrifice on it your burnt offerings, your this is usually translated as peace offerings, your flocks, meaning sheep and goats, your bikarcha, your oxen. And any place that I shall cause my name to be remembered. Okay, what does that mean? We'll talk about this later, but ultimately there's only one place that's chosen. And when I say later, I say when we do the book of Leviticus, ultimately there's only one place that's chosen for God's name to be remembered, and that's revealed at the end of the book of Samuel, 2 Samuel, and that is Jerusalem. Okay? Okay, every place I cause my name to be remembered, I will come to you and I will bless you. Okay? Let's look at this phrase, askirat shemi. Every place that I cause my name to be remembered, this should ring bells for us. Okay, alarm bells should not alarm bells, but I don't know, bells of happiness bells, church bells, not church bells. No, definitely not church bells. But this should harken back very strongly to Exodus 3. Let's just find it here. 15. Okay, when Yahweh reveals his ineffable, his eternal name. Verse 15, وَيُمِرْ عَوْدَ إِلَهِمْ Moshe, and God further said to Moshe, Kot tomar el bnei Israel, so you shall say to the children of Israel, Yahweh Elohei avotechem, Yahweh, the God of your fathers, Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Shelachani, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, sent me elechem, sent to you, Zeh Shemi le'olam, this is my name forever, V'zeh zichri ledor dor, and this is the way you shall remember me, or the way you shall mention me, from generation to generation. Okay, so the name, okay, the Shmi le'olam v'zeh zichri ledor dor. Okay, this is my name forever, and this is the way I shall be mentioned or remembered from generation to generation. So this idea of God's name being remembered, okay, and being mentioned. Okay, it's very similar language to what we see here. I will cause my name to be remembered. Okay. So that's hearkening back to this idea that the way that the name should be remembered or mentioned is by the name Yahweh. Okay, it harkens back to Exodus 3:15, verse 25. Oh, here it is. I'm sorry. I thought it was in Leviticus right here. My mistake. And if you shall build me an altar of stones, taseli, if you shall make for me an altar of stones, do not build them. Speaking about the stones, and how do we know that? Because avanim, even is a feminine noun, and ethen is the object, the accusative feminine plural pronoun. So avanim, ethen. Okay, it matches. Gazit, you shall not make them gazit, meaning quarried. Would be a good translation. How do they translate it here? Of hewn stone. Ki harbacha hinafta aleha. Because if your sword shall be wielded against it, against the in this case the mizbeach, aleha. No, I think it's talking about one stone. If your sword shall be wielded against a stone with ti halaleha, then it shall be rendered impure. It shall be unsanctified, or how do they translate here? Profaned. It shall become profaned. Okay, so there's this idea of not wielding the sword against the stones to make up the mizbeach, the altar. Okay, so two choices: either make it of dirt or make it of stone that are not quarried. Basically, the way you would build a stone wall, which I've done in the past. I used to help out a friend sometimes with construction work in Israel. And one of the things we would do is build stone walls. And there's a whole science to building stone walls, believe it or not. I wouldn't say science, more like an art. And you could build a stone wall without using any concrete, as people have done throughout the ages, probably throughout the entire world. But certainly in the Middle East, it's extremely common, even to this day. You can build a stone wall without any concrete just by grabbing stones, and you kind of just fit them together, because there's so many different stones with so many different shapes. It all comes together almost like a Tetris kind of situation. At any rate, it's the same. That's how you would build the altar, right? It just stones that are fit together, but not wielded. Is there any reference of Israel building an altar for the temple using used stones? Not that I know of. I've just heard this past week that the Tanakh promoted that. I do not believe that, but was wondering whether I don't know where they're getting that from. I don't remember any situation where that's the case. Okay. So another thing that I'll point out is something I've pointed out many times before, that people who don't understand the language of biblical Hebrew, or shall we say the way the Torah expresses itself, would find a problem here. One little minor task here. Done. So verse 24 says, make an altar out of dirt. Great. And then I'll come and I'll bless you. Okay. Seems like that's it. Okay. An open and closed case. It's cut and dried, right? You have to make an altar out of dirt. But then verse 25 says, but if you don't make an altar out of dirt, if you make an altar out of stone, then it should not be quarried stones. So what the heck? What is this? The Torah just told us, make an altar out of dirt. It says here, Mizbeach Adama Taseli. Okay, make an altar out of dirt. So what is the Torah coming saying? And if you want to make it out of stone, it just told us to make it out of dirt. It seems like a contradiction. It seems like the Torah is contradicting itself. Of course, if you are a biblical scholar working at a university, you're going to say, yes, of course it's contradicting itself. This is what would this be? We have the word, well, it doesn't have Elohim or Yahweh, but we'll pretend this is the E source, the Elohist source, and this is the J source, and they're just melded together to make the final document, and that explains the contradiction. That is a load of baloney. That's not the way the Torah works. The Torah always works, I wouldn't say always, but we've seen it many, many times that the Torah works in what the rabbis, I'm only referring it using the rabbinical terms because that's what I remember that's what I learned in yeshiva, but we could call it lichatchila and bidi avad, or different choices, okay? So lichatchila, the preference is, in this case, I'm not even sure it's a preference. It might just be two equal choices. You have two choices here. But the way the Torah expresses itself often is, we'll pretend it's a preference, okay? Make it from dirt, okay? Make it from soil, okay? Make the altar from soil, okay? That would be my top choice, God is saying. But if you really want to make it from stone, you can make it from stone secondarily, okay? Bidi avad. You can make it from stone secondarily, but it cannot be stone that is hewn. It cannot be cut with a sword, okay? That's what there's no contradiction here whatsoever. It's just the way that biblical Hebrew, that the Torah expresses itself. And we see this many, many times. I pointed this out many, many times, and I'll point it out very quickly. One other example, and that would be in Exodus chapter 12. One second. Okay. Okay. Exodus 12, verses. Second? Yeah, verse 10. Okay. So Exodus 12, verse 10, speaking about the first Passover, when the Israelites are going to be huddling in their houses, or cowering. No, not cowering, definitely not cowering. Huddling in their houses, waiting for God to come save them and free them from the slavery in Egypt, which they've suffered for many hundreds of years. And it says, verse 10, Lo toturu mimenu, speaking about the Passover sacrifice, which is to be killed, okay, on the 14th, Ben Arba'im, meaning at once the sun sets on the end of the 14th day of the first month. Lo totiru mimenu ad boker, do not let it remain until the morning. But that which does remain until the morning, burn in the fire. This seems like a contradiction. What are you talking about? It says, Lo totiru mimenu ad boker. Do not let it remain until the morning. The Torah is telling us, don't let it remain until the morning. So what do you mean if it remains, or that which remains, burn in the fire? The Torah just told us, don't let it remain into the morning, right? It's a contradiction. Now, those who are into the documentary hypothesis are going to have a little bit of a problem here, because it's a single verse, okay? And generally, I don't ever remember. I'm sure there are some cuckoos out there, documentary hypothesis diehards, who would actually say that even a single verse is put together from more than one source, but usually I've never heard that. Okay, so how do you explain this? Seems like a contradiction. There's no contradiction. The Torah is talking about two choices, or is talking about lichatchila in bidi avad, the desirable choice. But if you cannot fulfill the desirable choice, then there's a secondary option. The desirable choice is that none of the Passover sacrifice should remain into the morning, right? You're not going to disgrace the Passover sacrifice by letting it sit around until the morning and get cold and rotten and disgusting, right? This is a holy sacrifice, okay? So that would be the first choice. Eat it all up. But let's say you're stuffed. You can't eat anymore, right? You have a lamb coming out of your ears at this point, okay? You're stuffed, right? You can't eat another bit. Well, then you can leave it into the morning, or if you have left it into the morning, if the situation, the facts on the ground the uvdot b'shetach, as we say in modern Hebrew. Okay, if the facts on the ground are you just couldn't consume it all by the morning, then that which remains in the morning you burn. So there's a preferable choice, and that would be the best thing to do. But if you can't, not all is lost, then you burn whatever's left over in the fire. And that's the way the language of the Torah often works. Okay? All right. Any questions, any comments before we go on and go into our actual parsha, which begins in Exodus 21? Anybody? No? Okay. In that case, let's begin in Exodus 21. This is Parshat Mishpatim. Okay. Wa'ele hemishpatim asher tasim lifnehem. These are the judgments. So there's these different laws that are usually used. There's chukim, mishpatim, and torot, usually translated as statutes and judgments. Mitzvot, commandments, judgments, and instructions. More or less, there's all this talk about how they might mean different things. Chukim are laws that can't be understood. They used to teach in yeshiva. I don't think any of this is true. All of them basically mean the same thing in many different contexts. Sometimes they have slight differences. So, for instance, Torot, when the word Torah is usually used, it's a set of instructions relating to a certain subject. So, for instance, the laws of the Passover sacrifice, or the laws of I don't know. Let's say the fire offerings, etc. Right? That's usually what Torah means. But often they're just used interchangeably. Maybe, perhaps, with the exception of the word Torah, which has that specific meaning of here's a set of rules regarding a certain subject. Okay. At any rate, the word mishpatim, which is usually translated as judgments, let's see how they're translated here. Judgments. It just means the laws. Okay. That's what we're talking about here. Laws. Okay. Maybe it has the implication, since it's mishpatim. Okay. Shofet, mishpat. The word shofet means a judge. So maybe it has the implication of laws that are to be adjudicated by judges. Okay. If you want to give a specific meaning for it, and perhaps in this context, it does have a specific meaning because it's clear we're talking about criminal and tort law, which will have to be adjudicated by judges. It's different from, let's say, the Torah of the Passover sacrifice, which are instructions for how to carry out the Passover sacrifice. So in this case, yes, you could claim that has a specific meaning of judgments, meaning to be adjudicated, the way that a judge should adjudicate in court cases. Then these would be these types of laws. Okay. At any rate, here's a bunch of laws. This is really the first time in the entire Torah that we're getting into the nitty-gritty of day-to-day life in Israel, right? We haven't heard anything like this yet. Okay, we've been in Genesis. We were consumed with the stories of the patriarchs. In Exodus, we were consumed with the Exodus story, and the only laws pretty much that we came across. Okay, we had a little bit of Shabbat. I'm not talking about the Ten Commandments, but up until the Ten Commandments, we had the Shabbat mentioned. We had the laws of the Passover sacrifice mentioned. And we had other laws relating to Passover mentioned, such as Pidyon Haben, the redemption of the firstborn. But we really haven't had any tort or criminal law as to how we're supposed to live our day-to-day lives as Israel in the land of Israel, or in the desert perhaps as well. But a lot of these laws really, even though it doesn't say explicitly here, apply to when we go into the land of Israel, right? But now the Ten Commandments, remember we spoke about last week in Parshat Yitro. There was almost like a marriage proposal from God, from Yahweh to Israel. Israel accepted the marriage proposal. They're now bound together. God is the God of Israel, and has been accepted as God of Israel. In fact, let's look at that for 1 second because it's so beautiful. That's going to be in Exodus 19. So Yahweh gives a speech, tells Moshe to tell the children of Israel something. Okay. So Moshe goes up to the top of the mountain, and now God has a message for Moshe, and we know it's going to be poetic because we see already a poetic cadence here. So you shall say to the house of Jacob, and so you shall tell to the children of Israel. Right? This already shows we're getting into poetic language, right? Because of this repetition. I think officially it's called synonymous parallelism. Although I might be wrong in that specific phrase, but basically it's a poetic form already, okay? Because there's repetition here, okay? And then what does God want Moshe to say to Israel? Atem ra'item asher asiti leMitzrayim. You have seen, you saw what I did to Egypt. Wa'asetchem al kanfei nisharim, and how I carried you on the wings of eagles. V'avietchem elai, and I brought you to me. V'ta, verse 5. V'ta im shamo tishma'u, and now if you will most certainly listen B'koli, to my voice, shematem et briti, and keep my covenant. V'ayitem li sigula, and be for me a treasure. Mikol ha'amim, from among all the peoples. Ki li kol ha'aretz, because I am all of the earth is mine. V'tem ti'uli mamlechet kohanim, and then you shall be for me a kingdom of priests. V'roi kadosh, and a holy nation, a holy people. Ela devarim. And that's the end of this. That's the end of what God wants Moshe to tell the people from here to here. So it's very poetic, right? These are the things you should say to the children of Israel. And it's very clear from the context here that God wants Moshe to say this word for word. Okay, from here to here. Okay? This is basically, as I called it last week, this is a marriage proposal. Okay? God has now taken the children of Israel out of Egypt. He's done for them. He's fulfilled his promise to the patriarchs. He's remembered them. He's passed judgment on their oppressors, and he's freed them and brought them out into the desert, into Hara Elohim, the same place that Moshe originally met God in the burning bush incident back in Exodus 3. And now he's fulfilled all of these promises, and there they are at Mount Sinai. And now God basically proposes to his beloved nation, right? Sigula, usually translated as a treasure. But maybe we'll look into, no, we didn't get off topic. At any rate, this is a marriage proposal, as I like to say, from Israel, from God to Israel. Okay, this is what God says to tell Israel. And you can almost see it. You know, God, okay, this is getting into a little theology and a little bit of philosophy, but God is very emotional, right? He's full of love. He's full of hate. This idea of God is like this, you know, separate entity who has no emotions. That's a load of baloney. That's maybe a Christian conception of God, but it's certainly not a Jewish conception of God. God is full of emotions. He's full of love. He's full of hate. He's full of jealousy, right? We say it explicitly. It says God is a jealous God, right? And these are not fake emotions. These are real emotions. It says that God loved Abraham, right? That's not some kind of, you know, stupid philosophical statement. That means, if we believe it at face value, which we should, that means God really loved Abraham, just as I might love my child or I might love my parents. God loved Abraham, okay? So God is full of these emotions. And you can almost see here when he's proposing to Israel that he's maybe even a little bit nervous in a certain sense. I know I'm projecting, but let's put it in, start the brackets here where we say, okay, Melech ben Yaakov is now projected. But I'm imagining that God is nervous. He loves Israel. He fulfilled his promise. He showed, right? It's like a bride, a groom who's proven his love to his beloved bride, right? And done great things for her and brought her a beautiful ring. And now he's down on his hands and knees and is ready to ask her to marry him. Well, in this day and age, I guess it could be him. In fact, I think in this day and age, didn't we even find out from the United States of America and their brilliant philosophy that even men can be brides? I don't know how that works. Anywho, you can almost see God, figuratively speaking, nervous, down on his knees, asking Israel, his beloved nation, the descendants of his beloved Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, to solidify this contract, this eternal contract of love and binding and boundedness and binding and connection, and not knowing what Israel is going to answer. So he tells Moshe to bring the message to Israel. Moshe brings the message to Israel. Okay, Yasem lifnehem et kol devarim ha'ela. He placed before them, meaning the people of Israel, all of these words. And the nation answers, we anu kol ha'am yahdao. And all the nation answered as one in unison, yomru kol asher diber Yahweh na'aseh. All that Yahweh has spoken, we shall do. We yashem Moshe el divrei ha'am el Yahweh. And Moshe brought back these words to God, right? So what is their answer? Kol asher diber Yahweh na'aseh. All that Yahweh has spoken, we shall do. Basically, Israel accepts the marriage proposal, and that's it. They are now bound. Okay, God has proposed to Israel. Israel has, in unison, Yahtao, accepted, and now they are bound forever. Okay, and right, and now they're going to consummate that marriage. Okay, and the consummation is not a sexual one, although if one really wanted to find certain elements of that in there, perhaps they can, because a sexual connection is somehow a human representation of closeness that must originate somewhere in God's way of being close to others, right? Because we're made in His image. At any rate, I'm not going to go down that route. But the point is that this marriage is now being consummated. How is it being consummated? It's being consummated at Mount Sinai. This is the God coming. This is the Ten Commandments. This is God coming down on the mountain and speaking directly to the people and giving them the Ten Commandments, basically saying who He is, what He's done for them, and what He wants, what He's going to do for them, and what He wants, and what He wants from them in return. That's basically Mount Sinai. In Exodus 20, the Ten Commandments is the consummation of the marriage which Israel has accepted, which in Exodus 19, after Yahweh proposed to them. Okay, so all of that is meant to say that so now we're going to get into day-to-day laws, right? Because God is going to fulfill His promise to Israel. He's going to bring them into the land of Israel, as He promised many times, and will continue to promise many times, although they're going to have a certain detour, right? And in fact, they already had a detour with the golden calf incident. They're going to be told they're going to be in the desert for 40 years. So at any rate, now we're going to get into day-to-day law as judges will have to judge it once the people get into the land of Israel. Okay, so here we go. With all of that introduction, we're now going to get into the actual laws. All right, any questions, any comments before we proceed? No? All righty then. Let's go. Verse 2. כי תקנה עבד עברי 6 שנים יעבוד ובשביעית יצא לחופשי חינם. So, if you shall purchase a Abed Ivri, an Israelite, a Hebrew slave, and we're going to see here, and we're going to see in other places, such as in the book of Numbers, there's a distinction made between how a Hebrew slave is treated and how a non-Hebrew slave is treated, okay? There are special laws for Hebrew slaves, and I would like to debunk right now this idea that non-Hebrew slaves are ever treated improperly. That's absolutely not true. They're treated very nicely, so much so that if you damage them another way, let's say you lose your temper and you cause damage to their eye or to their tooth, it's explicitly in the Torah, then they're set free. So non-Hebrew slaves are not tortured or oppressed in any way, shape, or form, but Hebrew slaves, being your own brothers and sisters, as we shall see in the upcoming verses, are treated really with kid gloves, even more so. They're given special treatment. They're not treated as slaves at all. They're treated basically as brothers and sisters who have fallen on hard times, okay? So here, these upcoming laws are speaking specifically about Eved Ivri, a Hebrew slave, and there's a maximum time that the Hebrew slave shall serve his master, and that's 6 years. Okay? 7th year, Yitzei l'chofshi chaynam. Well, this should remind us of something, shouldn't it? 6 days of work, seventh day of rest. 6 years of planting the fields, Leviticus chapter 25. Seventh day of letting the fields lie fallow. 7 cycles of those 7 years, and then the next year is the Jubilee year, right? Well, let's not go there because it's not quite 6 and 7. But in these two cases, we have a situation in the Shabbat and in the Shemitah, which is actually called a Shabbat. There are 3 things in the Torah which are called Shabbat. One is the 7th day of the week, the Shabbat, the Sabbath. The second is the Shemitah, Leviticus 25, and the third is Yom Kippurim in Leviticus chapter 23 and in Numbers chapter 16. Okay, so this should remind us of a Shabbat, right? 6 years you work, 7th year you're set free. It's almost like the Shemitah year, where in the 7th year, on the Shemitah year, all debts are forgiven, right? Same thing here. It's not in line with the Shemitah year, but it definitely harkens back to this idea of the Shabbat, 6 days of work, 7th day you're set free, or the Shemitah year, which is called the Shabbat explicitly in Leviticus chapter 25. 6 days you plant your fields, and the 6 years you plant your fields, and the 7th year the fields lie fallow, and all debts are forgiven. Okay, tell that to Bank Leumi. All right. So on the 7th year, at the beginning of the 7th year, the Hebrew slave goes out, lechofshi, meaning to freedom, chinam, which means without any debt. In other words, that's it. All the debts are paid off. There's nothing more to be paid off. Okay. In modern Hebrew, chofshi is translated as free, and chinam is translated as free, but they mean 2 different things, as in English. Okay. So chofshi, you may have heard it somewhere, such as in the Israeli national anthem, Liotam Chovshi B'Yatzenu, to be a free people in our land. Okay, so that's this sense of Chovshi. Freedom means you're free, right? You don't have any master over you, and that's what it means here. Chinam in modern Hebrew and in biblical Hebrew means free, as in I go to the store and I find I don't know, someone says I don't need this kilo of tomatoes, take it for free. Okay, that's that type of free. Okay, so if you wanted to translate it using modern Hebrew, it would say in the 7th year he goes out free for free, and that's really what's going on. But it's 2 different senses of the word free. Chinam. Let's see. So without they translate it without cost, without cause. Okay. Let's see if we could find a good illustrative verse. So this is Yaakov and Lavan and so now Lavan wants Yaakov to stay for another 6 years, or for more time after the 14 years. And actually, that might not be after 14 years. Let me go check it out. So I'm not saying incorrect things. 15. Whole month. Oh, okay, so here it is. It's before. It's after a whole month. Okay. So just because you're a relative of mine, should you work for me for nothing, for free? Tell me what your wages should be. Okay. And then we start the 7 years, and then the other 7 years, and then the other 6 years, for a total of 20 years. Okay. So that's the sense of chinam, right? Without cost, free in that sense. Okay. Choshi means free, like go free, like you have no master. Okay. So that's the idea. So the Hebrew servant, after the 6th year, at the beginning of the 7th year, gets both types of freedom. He's set free, and he's paid off his debt. He has no more obligations to his master, because slavery, servitude, some people don't like to use the word slavery, because slavery in our modern context implies that the person who is the slave, I will not be politically correct and say the enslaved person, which I hear everybody saying now. The person who is a slave is somehow beaten, oppressed, and that's not the case. So some people would replace the word slave with the word servant, and slavery with servitude. We'll go with servitude so it doesn't have that negative connotation. Okay. So at any rate, in the 7th year, the servant goes out without free, and that's it. He's paid off all his debts. And what I was going to say is that, and we see it explicitly in the Torah, that slavery was usually, or should I say, Hebrew slavery was usually a way of paying off debt. Right? That's really the only way you could become a Hebrew slave. I don't know about the only way, but that's the usual way. If you were to become a Hebrew slave to another Hebrew, it was to pay off debt. Basically, it was indentured servitude. You fall into debt, you don't have any money to pay it off, and so therefore you become the indentured servant to somebody else. Okay. But for Hebrew slave, the maximum time, no matter what you owe, you can owe $100, you can owe $100 million, 6 years, and that's it. You're done. You've paid off your debt. Okay? ואם ברפו יבוא, ברפו יצא, אם בעל אישה הוא, וירצה אשתו עמו. So, אם בכפו, oh, sugar. No. Okay. So imba kapo yavo, if with only himself, literally his body, he came in. The kapo yetse, with his body he shall go out. In other words, if he was alone when he came in, then he goes out alone. Okay. Imba al isha, if he was the husband of a woman, if he was married man and came with his wife, because his wife is going to go with him, right? It's in this day and age, if you go to jail, you don't take your wife with you, but there have been societies. In fact, I think there might even be modern societies where if you go to jail, your entire family goes with you. I think North Korea, not that that's exactly a shining example of happiness and freedom, but I think in North Korea, if you go to jail, your entire family goes with you. I know, I won't say I know, I'm pretty sure that in England, up until I think it was the 1800s, that if you went to jail, then your family went with you. You were not separated from your family. So it's the same idea here. If you're going to go into servitude and you're married and have children, you're not going alone. You take your family with you. This is not jail, so it's not really punishment per se. It's a way of paying off debt. So kal v'chomer, even more so, you're going to take your family with you, right? So if you come in married, then if literally if he is the husband of a wife, then his wife shall go out with him. Okay, so if you come in married, if you come in with a wife, you can take your wife with you. Okay, why is that important? Because we're going to see the contrasting case. Verse 4: Im Adonai yitelo isha, yalda lo banim on banot ha'isha, yiradeha ti'e le'adoneha wahu yaseh be'rapo. And if his wife should give him if his master should give him a wife, and she gives birth to children, to sons or daughters, then you have here an etnach, which signifies basically a semicolon. So semicolon. Then the wife or the woman and the children shall remain with her master. Her master meaning the wife's master. So the wife with her children shall remain with her master. And he shall go out alone. So we're going to talk about this a little bit more, and then we're going to look at a little commentary on it. But this is a kind of an interesting case. Okay? So if his master gives him a wife and children, if his master gives him a wife and she has children, then that wife and children remain the property of the master. So let's think about this a little bit, right? First of all, that sounds really cruel, man. I mean, like, you have a wife, you have children, and you don't even get to take them with you? Well, we're going to see that there is one way out of it. But let's examine it a little bit further. Now, I've not checked with any of the commentary, but I've thought about this a lot, and I want to see if we can find it in the commentary. Let's think about this. This wife, this woman, and these children that are being given, well, let's forget about the children for a second. This wife that is being given to to the husband, is this an Israelite woman? Is this a Jewish woman? I don't think so, and I'll tell you why. Right? Because if it were a Jewish woman, okay, then she would also be she would also be a shifcha. She would also be a slave, and she would go out after 7 years as well, right? So the husband, let's say he gets out. Let's say he's in there 2 years in the servitude, and then he's given a wife. A year later, he has a kid with her, and a year after that, he has another kid with her. So now 3-4 years into it, and then he goes out after the 7th year, then he's got to wait. He's got to wait at most another, in this case, 5 years before his wife is going to go out as well, is going to be set free as well, if it's a Jewish woman, because the same law would apply, even though it says Eved, right? The same law would we can assume, although not be 100% sure, that the same law would apply. So he's just got to chill out for 5 years, wait for his Jewish wife with the children to get set free from their servitude, because the maximum, 6 years. So because the maximum time they could be servants would also be 6 years, and then they'd all be reunited, right? So I don't think it could be possibly talking about that case. It wouldn't make sense. It must be a non-Jewish or a non-Israelite woman who does not follow the laws of the Hebrew servants, okay, and is not set after 7 years. So let's just first of all keep in mind that this is probably a foreign woman who has been captured in war or who has been purchased, because that's the main two ways that Israelites or any society back then acquired slaves that were not of their own nation, right? It was either they purchased them or they were captured in war. So we're talking about a foreign woman here. That's the first thing to point out, in my opinion. And I want to see if any of the commentators pick up on it, okay? But we're talking about a foreign non-Israelite woman, okay? And so that all of a sudden kind of reduces it a little bit. Yes, the children will have an Israelite father. That's 100% for sure, since everything goes by the father, okay? But not 100% Israelite, right? The mother is not Israelite, and so there's not the same, maybe not the same connection there. This would maybe harken back to Ezra chapter 9, where the foreign women and their children are asked politely to get the heck out of town, and they do. But at any rate, without getting into all of that, I want to point out that it seems to me that we're talking about a foreign woman here and not an Israelite woman. Okay, let's read verse 5, and then we'll look at some commentary. Verse 5: Im Amar Yomer Ha-Eved Ahavti Et Adoni Et Ishti Wa Et Manai Lo Ese Hoshi. And if Omar Yomar, if he should possibly say, or if he should certainly say, repetition, you have here Amar Yomar, so it's pointing out, right? It's emphatic, right? Like the guys shook up, right? This is not just if he should say, if he should certainly say, or if he should if he should inevitably say, maybe that's a good way to translate it. Okay, if the servant, the slave the Hebrew servant should inevitably say, I love my master and my wife and my children. I don't want to leave them. I don't want to go out free. Okay, so here's another option, right? If he doesn't want to do that because he knows he's going to be separated from his wife and his children, then he has another option, which is to remain with his master forever. But let's talk about verse 5 for a second, okay? So first of all, I always find this verse very informative. Haftiet Adoni, I love my master. That's pretty strange, right? That's not the typical kind of story or narrative that we get for the relationship between a slave and a master, right? The master is always the oppressor. The slave is always oppressed. He's kept there against his will. He's beaten and taken advantage of, and obviously hates his master and would revolt against and kill his master at the first opportunity possible. But that's not what we see here. We see that the Torah actually opens the possibility, or perhaps even the probability, that the servant, loves his master. Okay. I know there were many, many incidents in American slavery where the slaves actually did love their masters and did not want to go free, and the masters were very kind and loved their slaves. I'm not saying that makes slavery a good thing or an appropriate thing for the United States of America, but I'm just saying that it was a known phenomenon. It wasn't always this oppressive, antagonistic relationship. Sometimes the slaves became trusted members of the household, and were very much cared for and loved by their masters, and the servants wouldn't even want to go out if they could. The slaves wouldn't even want to go out if they could. I was going to say something that I forgot what it was. Oh, yes. I was going to say the example we have in, well, he's only mentioned once, but Eliezer of Damascus mentioned in Genesis 15. Abraham was going to leave his entire inheritance to Eliezer of Damascus. It says so explicitly in Genesis chapter 15 when we have the Brit Ben Abitarim, the covenant of the split, almost split hooves, of the split animals. Okay. So that's clear that there was a very, very close relationship between Abraham and Eliezer, right? Because otherwise he wouldn't, assuming that he doesn't have a child, which he didn't know he would at the time, he wouldn't have chosen to leave his entire inheritance to a slave. So this whole idea that there was this hatred and this antagonism, and that the slave was an oppressed individual, tortured, beaten, and strung up on trees and whipped by the master, is not really, I don't think, a correct narrative. At any rate, I do find this verse a little bit puzzling, to be 100% honest, because we have three things here. If you love your master, your wife, and your children, then, as we'll see in the next verse, you could stay with the master forever. However, let's say you just love your wife and your children, which is natural. Well, at least the children part is. Hopefully you love your wife as well, but I don't know. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. At any rate, and maybe you hate your master, right? Well, then what do you do, right? Now you have a dilemma. Okay, I don't want to leave my wife and children. I want to stay with my wife and children. That's my wife and my children, but I can't stand my master. He's not a good master. Maybe he is violent. Who knows? Because masters did have the right to be violent. There were consequences for doing so, but they did have the right to enforce. The head of the household had the right to use physical force against any of the members of his household, including his wife, his children, and his servants, and even his animals if he needed to. I don't think a good master would do that, or would do it very, 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 very sparingly, but he did have that right. The master, the head of the household, was the king of his castle, to quote Jackie Gleason playing Ralph Cramden, okay, in The Honeymooners. You don't get the reference, boy, you missing out on some good stuff in life. At any rate, so it's a little bit strange, right? So maybe there's a dilemma there, okay? But we can't go into that. He has the right to decide whether he's going to stay, if he's going to go. If he decides he wants to stay with his master, wife, and children, Wayigishu Adonai El HaElohim, and so his master brings him to they usually translate this as judges. I don't know if I like that translation at all, and we'll talk about that in a second. Wayigisho El Adelet, and then he brings him to the door, or El Mizuzah, or to the doorposts. And he his master pierces his ear, meaning the slave's ear, with a martzea. A martzea is an awl, A-W-L, they usually translate it as. Now, I have no idea what an awl is, but we can imagine what it is from the context, right? It's basically a long stick with I do know what an awl is, but I'm saying most people don't, and I certainly didn't in the past until I came across this verse many times and then looked it up. And then the servant is his forever. Okay, so this is now a ceremony whereby his ear is pierced basically with like a spear into the door of the house, of his master's house, and that symbolically now means that slave is now, he doesn't go free after 6 years, even if he's an Eved Ivri. Even if he's a Hebrew servant, he does not go free after 6 years. He remains with his master as a servant for life. Okay. So I used to think when I first read this in yeshiva, it says Ratzah, his master punctures his ear or pierces his ear. See, it wasn't usually translated as pierced. Let's see what it says here. Pierce, it doesn't say pierce here, but I think I saw it originally as punctured his ear with a martzea, with an awl, and I pictured him like taking the awl and shoving it into his ear, and like shoving it into his head, into his cranium with an awl, with a spear. I always thought that was very strange. And then I remember some rabbi corrected me and said that I obviously misunderstood it. At any rate, the strange mistakes of a beginner Torah learner, as I was when I first came to Israel. Okay, so, but symbolically now he becomes his master's. There are many commentators who point out the idea that symbolically he's now being bound to the house, to his master's house, right? He's the spear is going through his earlobe and sticking him or binding him to the house. The spear is binding him to the house, so that symbolically means he's now bound to his master's household forever. Okay? All right. Yeah. Okay, so let's see if we can get a little bit of commentary here. And let's see. Well, we'll go with Robert Alter as we usually do. So this is Exodus chapter 21. All right, let's see what we got here. Okay, so let's see what we have here. Well, first, let's read Robert Alter's translation of these verses. Should you buy a Hebrew slave? 6 years he shall serve, and in the 7th year he shall go free with no payment. If he came by himself, he shall go out by himself. If he was husband to a wife, his wife shall go out with him. If his master should give him a wife, and she bears him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall be her masters, and he shall go out by himself. And if the slave should solemnly say, I love my master, and by the way, that's how he deals with the repetition, Amar Yomar, Amor Yomar, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go free. His master shall make him approach the gods. See, Robert Alter does not translate that as judges, rightfully so, and make him approach the door or the doorpost, and his master shall pierce his ear with an awl, and he shall serve him perpetually. Okay, so let's get a little commentary on that. So, and these are the laws. Robert Alter has to say, after the 10 divine imperatives, couched in absolute terms and addressed to each Israelite in the second person singular, you shall do, you shall do. We have a series of miscellaneous laws formulated casuistically, i.e., according to a hypothetical case. Should a man do X? This collection of laws, which make up chapter 21 through chapter 23, is conveniently called the Book of the Covenant, in accordance with the phrase used in 24:7, and he, Moses, took the book of the covenant and read it in the hearing of the people. Though some scholars have questioned whether the text referred to that Moses reads to the people is really the same as its legal miscellany, which I don't think it is. It is probably one of the oldest collections of law in the Bible. It exhibits numerous parallels with, as well as divergences from, the Code of Hammurabi, with sundry, I'm just joking, with sundry other Sumerian and Akkadian codes, and with Hittite law, all of which have been abundantly studied in scholarly literature. Okay. You shall set before them. Shetasim lifanehem. So that's God speaking to Moshe. Moshe is going to give him these laws. Okay, should you buy a Hebrew slave? Poignantly, the first laws in the group deal with the regulation of slavery addressed in the narrative situation to an audience of newly freed slaves. Okay. The situation may dictate the somewhat unexpected designation Hebrew slave rather than slave from your people or slave from your brothers, because that was the identity of the Israelites in the eyes of their Egyptian masters. Hebrew generally begins a foreigner's label for an Israelite. Okay, fair enough. What is clearly involved is not chattel. So in the 7th year, that Hebrew slave should go free. So Robert Alter has to say what is clearly involved is not chattel slavery, but what amounts to a kind of indentured servitude. That's what we said before. The Bible does not question this institution, but sets certain limits on it. And as one can see in the subsequent laws, the slave retains basic human rights. So pretty much what we're saying. Okay, by himself, bigapo, might mean, according to Umberto Cassuto, the corner wing of a garment. If this is the case, it would have the idiomatic force of with the shirt on his back and nothing else. Okay, fair enough. I was kind of thinking the same thing, but poet doesn't really mean that. So, okay, anyway, the wife and her children shall be her masters. The evident implication is that the master gave the slave girl to the male slave for breeding purposes, not for sentimental reasons. The next verse, however, reflects a recognition that even in such brutally economic circumstances, the man may develop an emotional attachment to the woman and to their children. Gee, obviously. So if the slave shall solemnly say, the emphatic force here of the infinitive followed by the conjugated verb amor yomar is to indicate a performative speech act, meaning a binding public declaration. I actually don't agree with Robert Alter on that one. So he's saying that this repetition here, im amar yomar evid ahafti, if the servant shall solemnly say, and then he thinks that this is what they have to say specifically. So it's like a speech. I don't think that's the case. I think the repetition, as I mentioned when we were talking about this verse, implies inevitability, right? So I would translate this as if the servant shall inevitably say, okay? Anyway, it's kind of a minor point. Make him approach the gods and make him approach the door and the doorpost. So the word translated here is gods. Elohim is a famous crux meaning a puzzle. The plural form, when it is treated grammatically as a singular, it usually means God. When it's treated as a plural, it usually means gods, although occasionally appears to designate some sort of celestial beings who are less than God. In this sequence, one cannot tell whether it is singular or plural, right? There's no matching verb to go with it. Rabbinic tradition sought to avert any possible scandal in the verse by interpreting Elohim as judges, right? So I mentioned this is the way it's usually translated, as judges. But the philological evidence for that understanding is slim. I agree 100%. The most plausible proposal that has been made is that the reference to household gods. I don't agree with that. There are several ancient Near Eastern documents indicating that these were placed by the doorpost and that certain legal declarations, blah, 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 blah. We can skip ahead, right? So basically what Robert Alter is saying is he refuses to translate it as judges, which is the typical translation. And I agree with him. There's no precedent here. There's no precedent for it to be translated as judges. And so he basically says, well, this harkens back to the age of Israelite infidelity to God, or not even infidelity, that before the Israelites became monotheists, he believes they were polytheists, as is the typical kind of academic belief. And therefore, this harkens back to the age when they had household gods. They had little idols that they bring around with them, like a little Jesus idol or something like that. Alrighty, so I don't agree with that. So I've heard other interpretations. I had one person point out, another Karaite, say that Elohim means strong people. I don't agree with that. I think that's a silly interpretation. And I have another Karaite, Hakham, who I do agree with. I think he comes up with the best explanation, and I'll give credit where credit is due. This is Hakham Yaakov ben Israel, who always used to say that this means Elohim. Elohim, it means the place where God chooses his name to dwell, meaning the main judge. Okay, that seems to be the best. And so literally it means God. Bring him to God. But where do you bring him to God? Well, you bring him to Jerusalem, right? That's where God dwells. That's where the temple is, and that's where the head judge dwells, because he needs to communicate with God. So if that were the case, then this would mean bring him to the head judge in Jerusalem, bring him to God, right? And then do the not even to the head judge, bring him to God, bring him to the temple, basically. And again, that doesn't really make sense either, right? So how can you bring him to the temple since you have to stick his ear through an awl into the door? I don't know. I just got to admit a big I don't know with that one. Okay, it's just the way it is. Okay, maybe you bring him to the temple and then afterwards you go back and do the ceremony with the door. Anyway, as Robert Alter says, it's a difficult one to interpret what's being understood there. But it definitely does not mean the judges, in my opinion. Okay, it means God. That's what Elohim means. God means Elohim. It means either God or gods. Robert Alter translates it as gods. I don't think that makes any sense. He's coming from an academic point of view where the Israelites were originally polytheists and they had gods. I obviously don't believe such a thing. I mean, if you go back before the time of Abraham, yes, but not by the time they were in Egypt and coming out of Egypt. So it's got to mean God. And whatever that means, who knows? The most likely explanation is take him up to wherever the Ark of the Covenant was. And remember, these laws are not necessarily for now. They're once the Israelites are set up in the land of Israel. Okay, pierces ear with an awl. There is no consensus on the symbolism, though it is not implausible that the ear might be thought of as the organ of obedience. Perhaps no symbolism is intended, and piercing the ear is a way of permanently marking the perpetual slave without serious mutilation, or perhaps the pierced ear might have been used to wear a ring bearing the master's mark or initial. Okay. So that ends that set of laws. We can look a little bit at Ibn Ezra. So this is Exodus 21. No, not Genesis. Let's try that again. Exodus 21. Oh, my battery's about to go dead. All right, just give me 1 second. I'll be right back. I just got to get the charger. So, you know what? Let me take a break for 2 minutes, put on some music, and then we will continue.
בואי בשלום, עטרת בעלה, גם בשמחה ובצהולה. תוך אמוניה עם סגולה, הללויה. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. בואי בשלום, עטרת בעלה, גם בשמחה ובצהולה. תוך אמוניה סגולה, בואי כלה, בואי כלה, בואי כלה, בואי כלה, בואי כלה, בואי כלה, בואי כלה. ראיתי כוכבים שמאירים את העולם ועם הזמן נעלמים. טיפסתי על פסגות הרים בדרך, גם שאלתי בעצת החכמים.
לא נתתי לעיניי להסתנוור מהמראות, והבנתי שיותר מדי זה לפעמים פחות. לקחתי לי מתוך השקט שיר לנשמה. אין עוד מלבדו, ללא כל ההסכמות.
Okay, we are back. Let me share the screen again. Let's cut the music. That's that. And okay, so yeah, we're going to look up Ibn Ezra. Let's make sure we got Ibn Ezra here. So it's Tanakh. Ibn Ezra, Exodus. What does this do? Exodus 21. So I don't want to focus, I just want to focus specifically on this one verse because I want to move ahead. Verse 4. So Exodus 21, chapter 4. Whoa, looks like Ibn Ezra is writing a book here. Okay, so just to make it go quick, I'll read in the English here. I'll refer back to the Hebrew. So if his master should give him a wife. So we're reading here. We find that those who employ the holy tongue render honor with various nouns, but not with verbs. They use the term adon, but also adonim. Okay, let's see what he's trying to get to here. So he's saying we never use the word adono, but always adonav. Okay, so he's saying something important but different here. He's speaking about the use of the plural for, he's basically saying that the plural can be used for, when it's used adonav as it is here, it can be used in the plural, referring just to a human, but when it's Adonai, it's also in the plural, but can only refer to God. I don't want to get bogged down on that. Okay. So here Ibn Ezra is agreeing with what I said before. It's a Canaanite woman. In other words, it's a foreign woman. And he is quoting the rabbinical sages, or the rabbinicals, the rabbis. Mishpatim 1, which I guess we could look it up, but let's just see what Ibn Ezra says. It is possible that the meaning of a Canaanite woman is in keeping with, moreover, the children of the strangers that do not sojourn among you, concerning whom it is written of them, ye shall bind bondsmen and bondsmaids. So he's referring here to Leviticus 25. So that's just a speculation. He's just referring to other verses here, but let me just read ahead here. The same applies to all Canaanite slaves. So Scripture states, thou shalt save alive nothing that breatheth with regard to the 7 nations. Okay. At any rate, the main point here is that Ibn Ezra does, quoting this Mishpatim 1, say that we're talking about a non-Israelite woman, which is exactly what I'd mentioned. And I think it makes sense from the context. Let's see if we could just add a curiosity. Does it link to there? No, it doesn't. Okay. Okay. So, and we can look also, let's look at one more commentary on this. This is 21.4. We look at Rabbi Dr. Hertz. Take a moment to load this up. So I got to estimate the pages here. Let's see where we end up. Nope. Oh, maybe it's better if I do it this way. Okay. So that's Exodus 26. Let's go back a bit. Exodus 18. 280. Let's try 280. There we go. Exodus 25. Okay, back. Wait, what's going on here? Exodus 14. Oh, it wasn't 25. It was 15. 17. Come on. Exodus 18. 20. Almost there. 21. Okay, here we go. Exodus 21, 4. Okay, so what does he say here? Okay. So, okay, Hebrew servant. Slavery as permitted by the Torah was quite different from the Greek and Roman slavery, or even the cruel system in some modern countries down to our own times. In Hebrew law, the slave was not a thing, but a human being. He was not the chattel of a master who had unlimited power over him. In the Hebrew language, there is only one word for slave and servant. Brutal treatment of any slave. Excuse me. Secured his immediate liberty. Okay, we mentioned that. In the 7th, from the time he was sold, if, however, the year of the Jubilee occurs, during the 6 years, the slave goes free without completing the time. And that's in Leviticus 25. Okay, I'll have to take a look at that. Let's take a look at that for 1 second. Leviticus 25. Oops. Just skim through the English for a second. One second. Oh, I'm sorry. The Jubilee year, not the Shemitah year. The Jubilee. Yeah, that makes sense. Let's see if we can see it explicitly. One second. So to be treated as hired workers as temporary residents among you, they are to work for you until the year of Jubilee. Then they and their children to be released, and they will go back to their own clans and to the property of their ancestors. So that's interesting. So in the year of the Jubilee, they and their children, it doesn't mention the wife, are to be released. So it's talking about male slave. Okay. So this would, I don't want to come to premature conclusions, but this would seem to imply that whichever comes first, the Jubilee year, and then even the children are set free as well, even if it's he married a foreign woman or he was given a foreign woman. And here he goes free in the 7th year. So I think this, on face value, it seemed that the two refer to the same situation, but it would really require a bit more examination, and I don't want to jump to any conclusions, but a point for further consideration. Okay. For nothing without paying for his release. Verse 3, by himself and not with his wife or children, go out by himself, married to an Israelitish woman. So here, so we saw in the Ibn Ezra that the Ibn Ezra quoted the Mishpatim 1, saying that it's not referring to an Israelite woman, it's referring to a Canaanite woman. That's what makes more sense to me. But Rabbi Dr. Hertz says it's an Israelite woman. Let's see what he has to say about that. The master is obligated to provide lodging and maintenance for the family of his bondman, the wife and older children, doubtless paying for their keep by their labor. Oh, I'm sorry. This is referring if he comes in with a wife already. Both the wife and the children accompanied their father when he acquired his freedom. Right. Verse 4, if his master should give him a wife, the slave had not the right of contracting a marriage for himself, a wife, and now a non-Israelite slave. Right. There was a saying current among ancient peoples to the effect that there was no morality among slaves. To prevent such promiscuity, the Torah makes a concession to human frailty and permits a temporary marriage, maybe. The wife and her children, in Jewish law, the children share the status of the mother. If the Israelite had been permitted to take them into freedom with him, it would have impaired the purity of the race and created a body of half-castes. Well, we don't go by the mother, we go by the father. But that is an interesting verse relating to what happens when you have an Israelite father and a non-Israelite mother. May be relevant to Ezra chapter 9, verse 6. Okay, verse 5, plainly say or firmly say the master attempts to dissuade the Israelite slave from preferring bondage to freedom, but the latter is resolute with his intention. My wife and my children, although it is natural for man to become attached to his wife and his offspring, even in the circumstances here described, yet such conduct must have highly injurious results to the Hebrew state. It would tend to produce a class of dependent slaves, and instead the community consisting of free and equal citizens, and would be divided into ruling and servile class. Kalish. Okay, I think that's enough. Let's move on to the next law, and that's beginning in verse 5. No, that's beginning in verse 7. Okay, so verse 7. And again, verse 7. V'chi yimkor ish et bito le'uma lo tetzeh ketzet ha'avadim. So if a man sells his daughter into slavery as a maidservant, lo tetzeh ketzet ha'avadim, she does not go out as would go out the slaves. Okay? So what does that mean? Okay? So she does not go out as would go out the slaves. Well, we could say that this means, right? We spoke about a slave going out before. This is speaking about a slave, okay? A male slave. And it also says here, right? If he was given a wife and that wife had children, then he goes out alone, right? So it would seem to imply that these laws do not apply to an Israelite woman who is sold into slavery, right? Ketseta avadim would seem to be implying that these laws up above, verses 2 through 6, do not apply to an Israelite woman, okay? Because a woman is not the same as a man. And besides, this is not, so she's not being sold as an indentured servant, she's being sold as an amma, as a maid servant. An amma is like a shifcha. It's basically like a secondary or second class wife. Okay, so a different set of laws here. But it also might not be referring to these laws here. It might be referring to, as we'll see in the context here, the way that a non-Israelite maidservant would be released. Okay, so let's read ahead and we'll see what we see here. Im ra'a be'anei adoneha asher lo ya'ada v'hevda le'am nochri lo yimshol li'machara b'bighdo ba. So if she is not pleasing, and the word ra'a is usually translated as bad or evil, but it doesn't mean that. It means unpleasant, or like a punishment might be unpleasant. Doesn't mean that it's evil, right? But if she is unpleasing in the eyes of her master, and here he's not called a Baal or an Ish, he's called her master, so it's clear that there's a servant-master relationship. Asher lo ya'ada, to which she was designated, right? In other words, to her master which she was given. I just want to get the English translation on that one. So this is 21:8. Whom she was intended, is the way Robert Alter deals with that one. He shall have no power to livdot, is to redeem, to redeem her, to have her redeemed to a foreign nation. For sale, seeing in that he's betrayed her. So basically what this is saying, okay, is if that someone takes his daughter, sells her as a maidservant, and a maidservant, again, this is not a short-term indentured servitude. A maidservant implies for life, basically, and this is backed up by the verses that we see here. So the master doesn't like her, he doesn't find her pleasing, he wants to get rid of her. Okay, what he can't do is sell her to a foreign nation. Okay, so that would imply that when it says here that she can't go out kitseta avadim, as the servants would go out, that this is actually not referring to these laws up here, which are specifically dealing with Israelite servants or Israelite slaves. These are referring to the way that a non-Israelite slave would go out. So if I purchase a non-Israelite slave, or if I capture someone in war, a non-Israelite, and he or she becomes my slave, then that is my slave for life, right? There's no implication that that slave can go out after 7 years. Only an Israelite slave who falls into ostensibly indentured servitude that can go out after 7 years. Okay, so this is speaking, and we know here that this is not speaking about a situation of going out after 7 years, because it's an amma. And from the context of the following verses, it would imply that as well. So this is speaking about, in my opinion, avadim. What this is saying is that an Israelite woman who's sold as a maidservant, as a secondary wife, is not to be treated as a non-Israelite maidservant would be treated, or as a non-Israelite slave would be treated. Okay, if I purchase a non-Israelite slave and I don't like that slave, I can sell it, sell him, sell her. We won't say it, right? I can sell him or sell her, whether it's an aved or an amma, whether it's a manservant or a maidservant. Okay, I can sell it, and I could sell him or her, or I could sell him or her to anyone I want, to a foreign nation. Okay. In the case of an Israelite woman, and it's clear we're talking about an Israelite woman here, right? It's from the surrounding context, right? These are all having to do with the Israelite women or Israelites. Okay, then I can't do that. I can't sell this Israelite woman if I don't like her After 3 years or 5 years or 20 years, I can't sell her, even though she is my servant. I can't sell her to the Ishmaelites, or I can't sell her to the Midianites, or to the Moabites, or to whoever. Okay? If he has no power to sell her, to redeem her, to have her redeemed by a foreign nation as for sale. Okay? Seeing that he has betrayed her. Okay, how has he betrayed her? He doesn't want to keep her. All right, that's in my opinion what it's speaking about here. That's the betrayal that it's speaking about. If he doesn't want to keep her, then that's a form of betrayal because he bought her as a maidservant for life. Now he's betraying her. He doesn't like her. He wants to get rid of her. Fine, he can get rid of her. Okay, but he can't sell her to a foreign nation. Okay, or maybe he can't get rid of her at all. We could talk about that. But the implication would be that if he can get rid of her, then he's either got to sell her to another Israelite, or maybe he can't sell her at all, or maybe he has to let her go free. Those are three possibilities. We'll talk about those in a second. We'll look at some commentary. Verse 9. Okay. Well, let's deal with verse 9 separately. Okay, so that's verse 7, verse 8. Let's get a little bit of Robert Alter on those two verses. Okay, Robert Alter has to say about verse 7, should a man sell his daughter as a slave girl? From what follows, it is clear that the impoverished father is selling her not to perform labor, as is the case of the male slave, but some sort of concubine, right? That's what we mentioned. It is for this reason that the conditions of her manumission differ from those of the male slave, right? So we pretty much said the same thing. Okay, verse 8. If she seemed bad in the eyes of her master, that is, if he finds anything about her that disinclines him to keep her as a sexual partner, the Hebrew amnochri, an outsider, then he cannot sell it to an outsider, is the way Robert Alter translates it. The Hebrew amnochri elsewhere would mean a foreign people. It's probably an archaic social term, another reflection of the ancient character of the document, with meaning kin. So I think if I understand what Robert Alter is saying is that he's implying that he can't sell her at all. He doesn't say only to a foreign nation. He means he can't sell her amnochri, meaning to anyone, to any outsider, to anyone but himself. I think that's what Robert Alter is trying to say. I'm not sure. It's not 100% clear. Broken faith with her, literally betrayed her. He's not honored his commitment to keep her as a concubine. So that's pretty much what he said. Okay? Ibn Ezra 7. Okay. So let's see if there's anything relevant to what we were saying. The phrase unto a foreign people, verse 8, is connected to this verse rather than what precedes it in verse 8. So what is he saying? 1 second here. I'm not sure exactly what he's saying. All right, let's just move on. 21:8. Sell her into a foreign people, he shall have no power, seeing that he has dealt deceitfully with her. The vigdo, that he's dealt deceitfully, is, and so now he's going to go into grammatical explanation. We don't want to get bogged down in that right now. Let's just move ahead a little bit. The sages do not be surprised at the distance between unto a foreign people and the verse to which it is connected, for as I will explain, it is the same case as he shall make restitution. Okay, so this is hearkening back to what he said before. Okay, so this goes back to his previous comments. The phrase unto a foreign people in verse 8 is connected to this verse in verse 7. So what is he saying? I'm not sure 100% what he's saying, and I'd have to sit here and analyze it. I don't want to do that right now. Rav Sadia Gaon says that unto a foreign people means to a stranger. So that's basically backing up what Robert Alter said. Okay. Let's read this part here. She shall not go out as manservants do. The meaning is, she shall not go out as manservants who always go out after 6 years. Maybe, but I said I think it doesn't mean that. I think it actually means she shall not go out as a foreign manservant would go out, meaning that he can be sold. The maidservant also goes out after 6 years of servitude, as scripture says, Deuteronomy 15:12. However, the maidservant goes out if she reaches the onset of puberty before 6 years pass. Okay, it's getting too complicated. All right, I think we're going to skip ahead because it would just take us too long to analyze it. All right, let's move on. Verse 9. Ve'im livno ya'dena k'mishpat habanot ya'aseh la. Okay. I'm in the middle now. I'm sorry. So if he shall designate her to his son. Okay, so we have the first case here in verses 7 and 8 is he sells his daughter to a person who then marries her. Okay. In the second case, he sells his daughter to a person who then gives her to his son. Okay. And let's just get a translation there. So this is verse 9. Kamishpat habanot ya'aseh la. So she shall be, basically she's treated as a daughter, right? So she's going to be treated well, let's see what that means, okay? It's going to explain. Okay? So if he should take another wife, so we're talking about a man, purchases this maidservant, this woman, for his son as a maidservant. And now the son takes another woman, okay? Maybe either a wife or another maidservant. Then he her food, this is usually translated as her clothing, and her sexual intimacy time is not to be reduced. He shall not reduce. Okay, so she's not going to be treated as a slave. She's going to be treated as he would treat his own, as he would want his own daughter to be treated, I guess we could say, right? That if his son should take another wife or another maidservant, then he still has to treat this woman correctly. Okay, he can't starve her, give her less clothing, ignore her. Okay, and if he can't do that, and if he can't provide these three things for her, if he cannot help but reduce all three of these things, if he cannot not reduce all three of these things, then she goes out. Then she goes out free. She's basically freed. Okay. There's a lot of ambiguity here. That much must be said. Okay. What does it mean, kamishpat habanot? It's not 100% clear. Just as we saw above, that the phrase Kitseta avadim is not 100% clear. So there's a lot of ambiguity. And we could sit here, we could analyze, we could chase it down, but I don't want to. I want to move ahead. Okay? So let's just leave it at that. Unless there are any questions or comments on these verses, and I'm just going to move ahead. Anybody? Questions, comments? Okay, let's go on to the next law. Makei ish umet mot yumat. So basically, we're talking about murder here, right? Not immediate murder, but violence that ultimately leads to murder. And we know that the penalty for murder in the Torah is death if it's an intentional, unwarranted murder, right? If it's unintentional, then we have the cities of refuge. But this is clearly intentional, okay? But again, the judges need to decide what the parameters of each individual case are. Verse 13, Vasher lo tzada, wa Elohim inah li yado wa samti lecha makom asher yanus shama. So now this is unintentional murder, right? This was what we would call in modern American jurisprudence. Not that I'm a lawyer, but as best as I understand, this would be manslaughter. Okay, and the Torah later on gives examples of this. For instance, it gives the example of the axe that gets looses that lets loose from its handle and flies and hits somebody. The axe head that accidentally is lets loose from its handle as a person is wielding it, hits somebody, and that person dies. It's non-intentional, right? However, there might be some element of negligence here. Like, why wasn't he more careful with his axe handle, right? So the person doesn't go completely free. Okay, it would be, let's say that someone is driving and they're tired and they get into a car accident and their passenger dies. Then the family is going to be very upset, but the family's not going to say family's going to say, yes, it was an accident, but it wasn't a complete accident because the driver maybe should have pulled off to the side of the road and rested, right? So there's some culpability there, but it's not intentional, right? The person didn't have the intention of killing the other person, right? But nonetheless, there was possibly some negligence there. Again, the judges will determine each specific case, and that's the whole point of these laws. However, in the first case, the implication is that it's intentional, right? First, what we call in American jurisprudence, again, as far as I understand, first-degree murder or second-degree murder. First-degree murder is premeditated murder, and second-degree murder is murder out of passion, right? So I think the classic example is you walk into your home, you go into your bedroom, and you see another guy in bed with your wife, and you completely lose control, and you kill the man, right? And really, you should kill the wife as well, but, according to the Torah. But you kill the man that's in bed with your wife. Okay, it wasn't premeditated. You didn't hunt him down you didn't target him to kill him. You just came in, you lost control. It was a crime of passion, and you murdered him. That's considered second-degree murder in American jurisprudence. Okay, so and that's specifically what's referring to here. So here's first-degree murder, premeditated murder. Here, asher lo tzada, he didn't hunt him down, right? It wasn't premeditated. Okay, Elohim inah liado, and God, what do you want? Oh, just water. And God made it happen. Inah. And we talk about that word, which is a very rare word. It might actually be a one-timer. No, it's not, but rare. I can't do it. Well, I'm in the middle. No, it's not actually.
What's the word for?
I'm in the middle now. Okay, I'm sorry. I can't have side conversations while I'm doing a Torah study. Okay. Look, ti'una. Okay, so it's the same word as in modern Hebrew. A ti'una is an accident. If you get into a car accident, it's a ti'una d'rachim. It's a road accident. Okay. So ina and so a ti'una is like an happening. Well, let's see how they translate it here. BDB translates it as ana, opportunely, to be opportune, to meet, to encounter, to happen, basically. Okay? The Elohim ina liado, and God made it fall into his hands, or made it happen for him, happen for his hands. Then I and we know this is later pointed out as the Levitical cities that are set up, right? That's explicit. So let's find maybe both of these. Okay. So it's no. Verse 35. Towns you give the Levites will be cities of refuge to which a person who has killed someone may flee. In addition, give them 42 other towns. In all, you must give the Levites 48 towns together with their pasture lands. The towns you give the Levites from the land the Israelites possess are to be given in proportion to the inheritance of each tribe. Take many towns from a tribe that has many, but few from a town that has few. So that's explicit. Okay, this is the explicit implementation of this place. Okay, and then it goes on. Verse 9, Yahweh said to Moses, speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you cross the Jordan into Canaan, select some towns to be your cities of refuge, to which a person who has killed someone accidentally may flee. They will be places of refuge from the avenger, so that anyone accused of murder may not die before they stand trial before the assembly. Is that really what it says there? Hold on one second. I just want to see Hebrew on that one. No, it does say that. Okay. These 6 towns you give will be your cities of refuge. Give 3 on the side of the Jordan, etc. These 6 towns will be a place of refuge for Israelites and for foreigners residing among them, so that anyone who's killed another accidentally can flee there. Okay. And then it goes on to speak about premeditated murder, non-premeditated murder. Okay, so it gives a lot of details there. Okay, again, I want to move forward, so I'm not going to look into that right now. But basically, that's what this is referring to. Those Levitical cities of refuge, the 6 cities, the 6 Levitical refuge cities. Okay, all right. וכי יזיד איש על רעהו להרגו בערמה מעם מזבחי תיקחנו למות. So if a person shall yazid intentionally or plan, shall we say, right? If a person shall plan to kill his fellow man, bi'arma, meaning on the sneakily. Here they translate this by treachery. Even from my altar shall you take him to die. Okay, so this is now saying, because it was tradition even back then, and we see this. We can find the place later on in the case of Solomon. With, was it Yoav? I think it was Yoav held onto the altar, and he was taken from the altar. We should actually even check that out. Actually, that might be, is that the Torah that's referring to Kings 12, 1 through 17. Let me just see something here. First Kings 12. 17. No, it's not. But we're going to find that. We'll look at that. Okay. So now there's another question that comes up. There's a lot of questions, right? These are not clear, especially to modern sensibilities. So are these three different laws? Is this second degree murder? Is this is clearly manslaughter? Is this first degree murder? Right? Is this a crime of passion? He finds his wife in bed with a man, beats the man, and then the man dies. And then this is clearly manslaughter. It was unintentional, but perhaps there's negligence involved. And here, this is clearly first degree murder. But also another possibility is this speaking about first degree murder, premeditated. And then this is just saying that if it's premeditated murder, even from my altar shall you take the person. I don't think so. I think this is speaking about second degree murder, what we would call in modern American jurisprudence. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but as far as I understand it, as best I can. So this is basically a crime of passion. There's no implication here. There's no implication here of premeditation, right? Of someone planning. Well, actually there is. I take that back because it's contrasted with verse 13 where it says Asher lo tzada, but he didn't hunt him, right? He didn't, and this implies premeditated murder. So maybe not. Maybe this is premeditated murder. In other words, first degree murder. And this is manslaughter. And then this is just going back to premeditated murder and saying if it is premeditated murder that's being recompensed, then even if the person holds on to the altar, to God's altar, then nonetheless he's taken there. Actually, that makes more sense because 13 seems to be contrast to 12. But again, a lot of speculation here. And if you read 10 different commentaries, you're going to get that 10 different opinions. What I would like to do is, so I believe it was Yoav, and then we can find the verses, and let's look at that. Up a little bit. Okay, so this is First Kings. Okay, so we have two instances. So one with Adoniah, but let's just read this one. First Kings chapter 2, 29 through 34. So First Kings chapter 2. And I'll just read it a bit in English, and then when we get to the one more second, where was this? First Kings 2, 29 through 34. So Yoav. So just to clarify here, one second. Okay, so one second. One second here. So yeah, so Adoniah had fled and held on to the altar. But let's just pick it up here. Okay, so now Yoav, who had done a bunch of evil things, he was a problematic kind of guy. He'd killed Avner ben Ner. He conspired with Adoniah against the wishes of David, who said the next king should be Solomon. All right, so let's pick it up here. When the news reached Yoav, who had conspired with Adoniah, though not with Avshalom, that was King David's son, who rebelled against him, he fled to the tent of Yahweh and took hold of the horns of the altar. King Solomon was told that Yoav had fled to the tent of Yahweh and was beside the altar. Then Solomon ordered Benaiah, that's basically Solomon's hitman, of son of Ben Yehoiada, go strike him down. Okay. So Benaiah entered the tent of the Lord and said to Joab, the king says, come out. But he answered, no, I will die here. Joab, Benaiah reported to the king, this is how Joab answered me. Then the king commanded Benaiah, do as he says, strike him down and bury him, and so clear me and my whole family of the guilt of the innocent blood that Joab shed. The Lord will repay him for the blood he shed, because without my father David knowing it, he attacked 2 men and killed them with a sword, both of them Avner's son Ner, commander of Israel's army, and Amasa, son of Yeter, commander of Judah's army, were better men and more upright than he. May the guilt of their blood rest on the head of Joab and his descendants forever, but on David and his descendants, his house and his throne, may there be the Lord's peace forever. So Benaiah, son of Yehoiada, went and struck down Joab and killed him, and he was buried at his home out in the country. The king put Benaiah, son of Yehoiada, over the army in Joab's position and replaced Abiatar with Zadok the priest. Okay, so Joab had killed 2 people. Okay, he killed Abner ben Ner. Okay, and he killed Amasa, the son of Yeter. In both cases, neither of one warranted death. So this was basically premeditated murder. And so even though Joab flees to the tent of God where the altar was, nonetheless Benaiah, David's hitman, goes and strikes him down there. Okay, so that would harken back to right here. Ish al-re'ehu. So if a person has committed premeditated murder, even from my altar shall you take him to die. Okay? Alrighty. Next law, makeh aviv wa imo mot yumat. Anyone who strikes his mother or his father shall die. So again, what does this exactly mean, right? If a little 3-year-old kid is refused chocolate by his mommy and he says, I hate you, mommy, and starts hitting her on the leg, does that mean he's now put to death? I don't think so, right? So the judges would have to figure out on a case-by-case basis, okay? Does makeh imply here that one of the parents has to die in order for him to die? I don't think so, right? Because then that would go under this general rubric right here, right? So it would have to be a pretty serious kind of situation. It would have to be an adult, right? Or someone who at least is, not a little tiny child. And in my opinion, it would have to be, basically beat his mother or father, which is an inconceivable thing, all right? We can get a little commentary here. Robert Alter. So this is 21:15. So Robert Alter doesn't have any commentary on there. Let's see if there's anything else to say. Oh, we could go back here. Meals. Okay, so going back to verse 12, he who strikes a man and he dies shall certainly be put to death. Kasudo notes a general structure parallel to the Decalogue. The list of laws begins with regulations about slavery. Okay, that's irrelevant to what we want to look for. I shall set you apart, a place to which he must flee. The presupposition of this institution of places of sanctuary for people who have committed involuntary manslaughter is vendetta justice, correct? The members of the family bent on redeeming the blood, Giulat Hadam, of their dead kinsmen, even if the killing was unintended, would not be permitted to penetrate these towns of refuge. Eventually, the state took over all functions of executing justice, and these provisions became anachronistic. Okay, but yeah, this is the idea of Goel Adam, the redeemer of the blood, that even if it was non-premeditated murder, then still the family might want revenge. I remember, I won't even say who, but I know someone who's traveling with a friend in a car, and the driver and the friend got into a car accident, and that person, I know someone whose son was traveling with a friend who was driving, and that friend got into a car accident, and that person's son died, and that person, the person whose son died, didn't take revenge, but felt like taking revenge on the family because he felt that son, that friend, was irresponsible and therefore responsible for his son's unnecessary death, and that stayed with him for the rest of his life. Okay, so there is a natural desire, even if it's an accident. Maybe there's negligence involved, maybe there's no negligence involved. But if there's some negligence involved, or the family who's bereaved might assume that there's some negligence involved, even if there's not, they're going to naturally, even if it wasn't on purpose, that the person did not intend to kill the other person, that nonetheless is going to be a desire for revenge. Okay, because it'll be perceived that there was negligence or irresponsibility. Okay. From my altar you shall take him. As in other cultures, the altar was a place of sanctuary, and someone accused of blood guilt could flee to the altar and cling to one of several carved horns at its corners in a plea to be held free of harm. This is what Joab does in 1 Kings 2, which we saw in an effort to escape Solomon's henchmen. Solomon orders him to be taken from the altar and executed, perhaps in accordance with this law, for Joab has killed 2 commanders of Israel in cold blood. That's just what we read before. So that's it. That brings us down to here. Okay. So no commentary here. Let's look at Ibn Ezra on 15. If it's not too long, we'll read it. Back here. Let's see how we do this. Come on. Oh, it's not doing it. Okay, 21:15. Okay. So Ibn Ezra says, so this Ibn Ezra saying basically what I just said right now. Since Scripture had previously mentioned he has smiteth a man so that he die, he shall surely put to death. Scripture had to explain that there's an instance where one is put to death for smiting someone, even when the one who is struck does not die, right? That's pretty much exactly what we said, right? That the case was already covered where someone strikes and dies. So that this must imply that even if you strike your mother or your father and they don't die, that nonetheless you're put to death. The case is when one hits one's father. Okay? This is the case when one hits one's father. The word makeh, and he that smiteth, is to be read as if it's written twice. Well, let's take a look at that for a second. So I guess what he's saying, makeh, maybe he's referring back to this here. I'm not sure. We'll try to understand what he's saying. Our verse is to be understood is written, he that smiteth his father and he who smiteth his mother. Okay, got it. Okay. Right. Okay, so he's making a grammatical point. It was out of regard for the parent's honor that Scripture found it necessary to state that even when one does not strike one's parent but curses them, he's put to death. So we're going to see that also. And that is Leviticus 20, verse 9. Let's take a look at that for a second. Okay, so Leviticus 20, verse 9. וכי איש אשר יקלל את אביו ואת אמו מות ימות אביו ואמו קילל דמה בו. So we can look at 3 laws, okay? If it's not your mother, father, just another regular person, but you hit the person, ostensibly premeditated murder, but not necessarily. The jury's still out on that one. No pun intended. This all has to do with cases judged by judges. But let's say it is, okay? Let's say it's second-degree murder, okay? So someone who beats someone, who hits someone, who beats someone to death, basically, is put to death. But if you beat your mother and your father, and even if they don't die, you're still put to death. And not only that, if you curse your mother and your father, or your father, I should say, then you're put to death. So your mother and your father, not only can you not beat, you can't even curse on pain of death. If it's not your mother and your father, then in order for you to be put to death, that person would have to die, right? That's if you kill, you're killed. That's the idea in the Torah, unless it's accidental. Okay. Let's see if maybe Rabbi Dr. Hertz has anything to say for that. About that, I should say. Let's see. I think I can do it and navigate this better. So that is here. So that's page. Oops.
Well, he's back.
Okay, great.
What do I do? Do I close the door?
No, let him be. Let him be. It's not dark yet. So let's find this here. 21. No, so this side. It's a weird system here. One second. Okay, so here we have 15. He that smiteth his father or his mother shall be put to death. And let's see what he says about that. Smiteth, the rabbis rule that only when the blow left a bruise was the death penalty incurred. Okay, so the rabbis are, honestly, they're doing what judges should do. They're setting parameters for the law. I don't fault them for that. I only fault them when they set parameters in a way that doesn't make sense, or when one says that their parameters that they set are binding. Just because their movement determined that it's binding doesn't mean that it's necessarily binding. Okay, so each judge would have to rule the case on its own particular merits. It's not that just because the rabbis say it, that means that that's necessarily the truth. Okay, that's their understanding. That's their movement's understanding. That's the parameters they set up. So there would have to be a visible bruise, and then the death penalty is incurred. Is it a bad way of understanding it? Is it a bad way of judging it, or giving, let's say, rules for judging cases, to give more detailed rules for judging cases? I don't think it is. But then again, I don't think the rabbis are. It's not. It's binding. It's their interpretation. And again, when it says the rabbis, who knows exactly what that means, right? The rabbis, the rabbinical movement is a large movement with a lot of different opinions. But at any rate, nonetheless, there we go. We're going to go for about another 10 minutes doing extended commentary, and then I'm going to switch over to what I call the simple or the express format. Maybe I'll even do this now because it's just so easy to get bogged down. We could take one law and we could literally spend hours on it, and we'll never get anywhere. So far, we've only gotten this is Leviticus. We've only gotten halfway through the first chapter, and we need to get to. We have a lot, so we're not going to get through. So I'm going to switch over to Express, which means I'm just going to read, translate, and maybe give some minor commentary, because I want to end the study within about half an hour or so. Okay. All right. So we're here. Wagonev ish umicharo wanimsa biyado motimat. So we're talking about someone who kidnaps, gonev ish. So some people said that where it says lo tignov, do not steal, because it's the same word here, gonev, there lo tignov. I've heard the idea bandied around that really it means don't kidnap instead of don't steal in the Ten Commandments. That's ridiculous, because it would have to specifically say, as it does here, gonev ish. Someone who literally steals a man, but it means kidnaps, right? So if you kidnap someone and sell them into slavery, wanim sabi ado motumat, and it's found in his hand. Whose hand? Well, if you already sold him, it's not found in the person who did it, right? So that would imply one of two things. You could interpret this as saying v'gonev ish u'micharo, someone who steals a man, who kidnaps somebody with the intention and intends to sell him, because even though this is the usually understood as the future or the imperfect imperfect can imply a lot of different things, including intention, desire, exhortation, and other things along those lines. So this could easily be translated as gonev ish u'micharo. he who steals a man, he who kidnaps someone and intends to sell him, and the man is found with him, meaning he didn't get a chance to sell him yet, motimat, he's put to death. So you cannot kidnap people and sell them into slavery. That's really bad, right? I think we call that human trafficking today, if I'm not mistaken. So we didn't even have to go that far. I forgot. It's right here. So he who curses his mother or his father or his mother shall be put to death. So you can't hit your mother or father, you can't curse your mother or father, or you're put to death. What does it mean to curse? Well, the word curse usually implies cursing in the explicit name of God. So you would say something like, God forbid, I won't even say it, but, in the name of God, may you, speaking about someone's mother, suffer, or something like that. You've now cursed your mother and father in the name of God. Okay, I don't think it means, F you, mom, right? As some stupid teenagers might say to their parents in this day and age where there's no discipline or, no social structure that's set out correctly. Okay. Again, judges would have to decide each case. Verse 18, so here we're talking about two men who are having a fist fight, basically. And so this is punches. This is with a stone, meaning a weapon, right? So that either with weapons or without weapons. Okay. And one basically mortally injures, or one badly injures the other one, so that he's lemishkav, he's bedridden, okay, or hospitalized, shall we say, in this day and age, okay. Im yakum wahit halech bachutz al mish'anto wa niqah makeh rak shito iten we rapo yirapeh. So if that person that he beat up, again, for no reason, we're not talking, again, the judges will have to consider each individual case, right? If the other person's attacking, right? Each case has to be considered for its own merits. These are just general guidelines, okay? So if the person hit the other one and there was no justification for it, such as self-defense or whatever, if he ends up hospitalized, ends up bedridden, but eventually gets better, then the person who did the beating, basically he has monetary obligations, okay? When nikah makeh, okay, in other words, he's not criminally charged. Rak shivto, so shivto from the same root as Shabbat, basically to halt or to cease. So it means the time, basically what it means is the money he lost by not being able to by being bedridden, right? So if his salary, let's say, or the money he would have made for his business, or whatever the case may be, basically talking about his salary, okay, shifto, okay, all the money he lost by being bedridden, so that the person who did the beating has to pay for that, rapo yirapeh, and he has to also pay his medical bills, okay. So basically, what it's saying is, if it's a street fight, and one person injures the other person, and again, I think the implication is that the second person, didn't deserve it. In other words, the first person wasn't acting in self-defense or something along those lines. Then the first person has to pay for his loss of work and has to pay for his medical bills. Okay, so it's a tort case. It doesn't become. There's no criminal charges filed, to use again the modern parlance. Okay. וכי יכה איש את עבדו או את אמתו בשבט ומת תחת ידו נקום ינקם אך אם יום או יומיים יעמוד לא יקום כי כסבו הוא. Okay, so let me just translate it first. So if a man should beat his servant, his manservant or his maidservant, his male or female slave, b'shevet, shevet is a, how do you say it in English again? Same thing there. His staff, okay, umet tachat yado, and he dies, nakom yinakem. So it's the same thing, okay? Nikah, it's the same word as here. He's clean, okay? Nakom yinakem. Oh, I'm sorry. It's not nakeh, it's nakom, okay? So it shall be recompensed. How they translate here, it should be punished. So linkom is to take revenge on, okay? Nikama is revenge. Okay, so it shall be recompensed. In other words, there's a punishment. Okay. Right. Okay. So okay, let's just review here. I'm going to translate it again, pretty much word for word. Then we'll discuss it. If a man should strike his manservant or his maidservant, b'shevet with his staff, umet, and that slave dies. Basically, he beats his slave to death. Okay. Okay, and he dies in his hand or in his hands or at his hand. Nakom yinakem. Okay. That should be revenge. Now, notice it doesn't say anything like mot yumat, he shall be put to death. It says nakom yinakem. Okay, that would imply to me that the judges would have to make a determination in such a case. Okay, but it's not automatic death penalty. It may not be death penalty at all. This might be referring to some kind of monetary compensation. Well, he's dead already, so I guess it's not monetary compensation. Maybe some other kind of punishment. Okay, we'll talk about that in a second. We'll look at some of the commentaries. Okay. However, if the slave doesn't die, im yomu yomayim ya'amod lo yakum lo yukam ki kasbo chaspohu. But if the slave doesn't die, the slave or the manservant or the maidservant, male or female slave, doesn't die, and he gets up after a couple of days, lo yukum. There's no the person is not punishment ki kaspohu because it is his property. Okay, so let's talk about a couple of things here. Okay, first of all, as we mentioned before, slave owners, and it's not clear whether it's speaking about a Hebrew slave or a non-Hebrew slave. I would assume this is speaking about a non-Hebrew slave, because again, Hebrew slaves are treated like brothers. But so I'm going to go with non-Hebrew slave. So if this is a non-Hebrew man or female slave, you are allowed to beat them. The head of the household has the right to beat anyone in his household if he deems fit. Again, a wise master is not going to do that very often or ever, right? But he has the right. The head of the household has the right to beat his wife or wives, his concubine or concubines, his child or children, and his servants or servants, and even his animals. He's the head of the household, okay? Now, if you think, I've done a video on this explaining this situation, but if you think there's something really strange or cruel about it, just think for a second that in this day and age, the government has the right to come and beat you if they deem that you've done something wrong. Okay, if you are, let's say, wising off to a policeman or acting the wrong way, that policeman can beat you. Okay, so there is such a thing as authorities, or if you do something worse, you rob a store or something like that, they could shoot you to death, right? So there is a case where the authority has the right to beat those under his authority in certain circumstances. And the difference is that in ancient Israel, the government had a lot less power, and a lot more power was put into the hands of the individual. So the head of the household, he was like a little king for his household. There were some good kings, some bad kings, some mediocre kings, but they were all kings. And just as today, the government has a right to beat you, which is disgusting, actually. The government should only have a right to do that in very, very limited cases. But if you live in, let's say, the United States, the police will beat you freely for even minor infractions. Okay, thank God it's never happened to me. But nonetheless, we do see that those who are in authority have the right to beat those who are under their authority. So it shouldn't seem as something horrible and cruel that the head of the household can beat anyone in his household if he deems fit. Okay, it's a lot more cruel that the government can appoint agents known as police to beat people for minor infractions. That is the thing that should be considered cruel, because that means that the power is taken away from the man, the head of the household, and put in the power of the government, and therefore rendering the nuclear and extended family as basically weakened and eviscerated and emasculated is the word I'm looking for. Okay, so that's kind of the context here. Right. So then we have two situations. So okay. So first of all, we've established the fact that yes, the head of the household can beat anyone in the household, including the slaves. Okay, and even if he beats him to death, okay, then there's no implication here of that he's put to death. Okay, because he's allowed to beat. Right. It's like, let's say you're, I don't know. Let's say your son comes home with drugs or comes home with a friend, they're both on drugs, and the friend robs the apartment. Okay, a situation that I actually had with someone I knew. Okay, nothing to do with me personally, but someone I knew had that similar situation. Okay, and then the father, being sick into the stomach by what his son did, beats his son. If that son dies, then it's not like the father intended to beat him to death. But if that son should die, then the father should not be put to death for punishing his son. It's the same kind of situation here, in my opinion. Okay, so there is nakom yinakem, there is recompense. There should be some kind of punishment. But I think the implication of the words nakom yinakem means it's left up to the judges. They look at the case. Okay, the punishment is decided by the judges, is what I think that means. Okay, however, if the servant does not die, the slave does not die, and he gets up after a couple of days, then lo yukam. Okay, there's no punishment rendered. There's no punishment against the slave owner because he did not beat his slave to death. He beat the slave, which he's allowed to do. Ki kaspohu, and there are two ways of looking at this, but I will translate it as because it's his property, in meaning he has the right to do it because it's his property. Okay, he has the right. The slave is his property, and he's the right under certain circumstances to beat his slave. Okay. Again, I think a wise master won't do that very often, but he definitely has the right to beat his slave, as he has the right to beat anyone in his household when he deems fit. Okay. Another way to interpret this is kaspo ki kaspohu, is it's his money. Literally means it's silver or it's his money. Meaning he's not going to intentionally beat his slave to death because he paid for the slave, right? Now he's out his money, right? If I have a slave and I beat it to death, let's say I paid $100,000 for the slave, and the slave dies, I'm out $100,000. Okay, and this reminds me of, not to bring up American slavery, which is such a hot button issue against the blacks, but if you saw, I remember watching the movie Roots many, many, many years ago, and there was a slave, I think played by the same guy who played the father on Good Times, James something or other, I can't remember, James Earl maybe was his name, I can't remember. And at the end, he played the adult Kunta Kinte, okay, who was renamed Toby, and Kunta Kinte kept on running away, and eventually Master Reynolds, I think it was, if I remember, it's been so long, decides, I'm going to keep the slave from running away, and he cuts off Kunta Kinte's leg. That's what I remember. I hope I'm getting the story right? And I remember there were some people who pointed out at the time, this is ridiculous. You would never cut off your own slave's leg because now your slave can't work for you. What are you going to do? You didn't kill him. You still have to feed him. You still have to house him. But he can't work for you. You can't pick cotton in the fields. So you're not going to cut off his leg, right? So it's a ridiculous idea. And I think that's the idea that's being expressed here, right? If you didn't intend, the implication here is you didn't intend to beat your slave to death. Why? Ki kaspohu, right? You're not going to beat your own slave to death because it's a monetary loss for you. That's why you have the slave. The slave is there to do work. Okay. So the implication, I think the underlying implication here is there was no intention to beat your slave to death. Okay. But if it happens, then the judges are going to have to decide, to what level you were guilty. Did you do wrong? Did you overbeat him? Maybe you even deserve the death penalty. Right. But it's not a necessity. That has to go to court case. That has to go to the judges, where the judges look at the merits or look at the circumstances of that particular case and then render a judgment as to what punishment should be done to the master. Okay. But if it's a case where he didn't beat him to death, he gets up after a while, then there's no punishment because it's clear the master never intended to begin with to beat his slave to death or even to beat his slave harshly because he's ki kaspohu. This is a possession that he's paid money for, and he doesn't want anything to happen to this possession because he needs the slave to do work. Okay, that's the way I interpret it. Let's see what Robert Alter might make out of that, and then I really am going to go into express mode here, and I don't even think I'm going to finish the parsha because it's too complicated. Okay, so this is Exodus 21:22. So let's just read here. Okay, and should a man strike his male slave or his slave girl with a rod, and they die under his hand, they shall surely be avenged, but if a day or two they should survive, they are not to be avenged, for they are his money. Okay, so let's get a little commentary on there. So that's verses starting with verse 20. The Hebrew says he in each instance because the masculine form has grammatical precedence, of course, referring to him or her just as in modern English, right? I was listening to some it's basically a quantum / relativistic physics channel. Amazing channel. If you want to look at it, it's called Science Click. Science CLIC. Really great stuff if you're interested in relativity and astrophysics and quantum physics. Science Click CLIC. Really nice channel. Lots of good visuals and good explanations. A little bit complicated, but very good. At any rate, I digress. The point is that there he was talking about astronauts, and he kept on saying, if the astronaut, blah, 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 if she does this and she does that, right? Trying to be politically correct. But we know that even in English, that up until the past couple of decades, that if you wanted to talk about he or she, you said he, right? You always used he, because the he is the one that takes grammatical precedence, as we see here. At any rate, since both the female and the male slave are mentioned as possible objects of the violence, the translation, in order to avoid the awkward he or she, switches to the plural. The same procedure is followed in several subsequent verses. Fine. So that's just a grammatical point. We do the same in English, right? If we say, let's say men or women could board this train and they pay the same price. Okay. Instead of saying he or she, you could say he. You would say they, right? Because that includes both he or she. Actually, that's not a perfect example, but close enough. Okay. But if a day or two they should survive, the sad implication of this stipulation is that the vigorous beating of slaves, male and female alike, was assumed to be an acceptable practice. That's what we just said. If a slave lasted a couple of days and then died, okay, so he's all right. I think he actually is right about that. That this implies that the slave does eventually die. Not that the slave gets up again, but the slave does eventually die. I think Robert also is right about that. So I amend my previous interpretation of those verses. The inference would be that the master had not intended the death, but had merely overdone the beating. If the slave died on the spot, this would be evidence that the master had meant to kill him, or at least was guilty of involuntary manslaughter. Okay. But again, it doesn't say mot yumat or anything like that. It says yakom. It says kom yikom, right? Or what does it say again? Nakom yinakem, right? Will be avenged or will be recompensed. Okay. In my opinion, that means it goes to the judges and they have to decide. Okay. For there is money. That is, it would be counter to the master's own interest to take the life of a slave after having purchased him to perform service. So the presumption is that unless the slave dies during the beating, there was no clear intention on the part of the master to kill him. So that's pretty much what we said. Okay. And then we go into other laws, and this is usually the next one are used for sometimes used to argue the point of abortion in the Torah. I won't even go down that route because I don't think that's where it applies here at all. But let's read it. And now I'm going to go into express mode. Okay. Before I do, any questions, any comments? Anybody? You guys are a very quiet audience today. Nobody? Okay, verse 22. V'chi yina'su enoshim v'nachfu isha chora v'yatz'u yeladeha v'lo yeh ason anosh ye'anesh. Okay, so anosh yanesh, he will certainly be punished, is very similar to nakom yanakem, certainly be recompensed. Kasher yashith alao ba'al ha'isha وَنَطَانْ بِفِلِلِيم. Verse 23. وَعِيم أَصَّنْ يِهِيَ وَنَطَطَ نَفِشْ تَحَتْ نَافِشْ. Oh, there's a lot to say about this, but I can't. All I'll say is that nefesh tachat nafish does not necessarily imply, even though it means life for life, it does not necessarily imply that the person is put to death. Ayin tachat ayin, shen tachat shen, yad tachat yad, regel tachat ra'el. So here it is, eye for an eye. Ayin tachat ayin. Shen tachat shen, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. Lot to say about this. I don't have time to go into it right now. All I will say is that it's clear to me that this does not literally mean that if you put someone's eye out, your eye should be put out. It means if you put someone's eye out, I'm sorry, I said that wrong. It doesn't mean that if you put someone's eye out, your eye is put out. It means if you put someone's eye out, theoretically speaking, you deserve to have your eye put out, but you can pay it off. The only time you can't pay it off is murder, and that's it. the idea of a kofer, or what's usually translated as a ransom, but what it really means is a monetary payment to basically forgive and forget. Not necessarily forgive, but to forget. Kviya tachat kviya, petza tachat patza, habura tachat habura. So more burn against burn, wound against wound, or shall we say injury against injury, wound for wound. Okay? So there's a classic eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, leaves everybody blind and toothless, as they like to say. Well, don't worry, because the Torah does not say that is to be taken literally, in my strong opinion. If I had more time to get into it, I would. I can point you to an article I wrote, if I can find it here for a second. Let's see. Let's see. Where's the article? One second here. Oh, here it is, an eye for an eye. So if you want to find out more about my opinion regarding this, and I do have to give credit where credit is due, my opinion on this was developed by a rabbi that I used to learn with named David Bar Chaim, who taught me a lot of weird, bizarre things, but taught me also a lot of true things. So he pointed this main idea out to me. And then I researched it a little bit further and wrote this article. This was many years ago. Okay, so there we go. All right. Yeah. Let's go on. I think I go to the end of this chapter and then I'm going to stop because it's already getting a bit late. וכי ייגח שור את איש או את אישה ומת סקול יסקל השור ולא יאכל את בשרו ובעל השור נקי. Okay, so if a shore, an ox, cattle kills a man or a woman and that person dies, then the shore is stoned to death and should not be eaten. Why not eat it, right? I mean, it's perfectly good thing, right? The idea is there's something, I mean, it's killed a human being, right? There's something creepy, there's something strange, or there's something just wrong, right? It just rubs the wrong way that animal, which did such a horrible thing, even though it was complete by accident. Everything an animal does is essentially by accident because they have no morality, they have no free will. They just do as they're programmed, or as they, as their programming dictates. But nonetheless, that animal is put to death and is not eaten, right? Because there would be something really, it just would sit the wrong way. There'd be something really morally creepy about enjoying an animal that killed a human being. Okay, but the owner of the animal is free. There's no punishment. There's no criminal case against the owner of the animal. Okay, he didn't know better, right? It's not, a person's not responsible for his animal unless, verse 29, im shor nagah hu mitmol shilshom wa hu'ad bib'ala wa lo yishmarenu wa himid ish or isha hashor yisakel v'gam b'alav yumat. So basically this is a case, well, I'll just translate it word for word. If the ox had gored someone to death, maybe even just gored someone in the past, mitmol shishom, literally yesterday and the day before, or yesterday and 2 days ago, which is like yesterday, starting counting from today. Tomorrow would be second day and third day. Yesterday and the day before, and this was known to its owners. And they didn't guard it, they didn't take care of it, they didn't prevent it from happening. They meet ish or isha, and then it goes and kills a man or a woman. And then the ox goes and kills a man or a woman. Then the animal is stoned to death, and obviously also not eaten. That's just logical conclusion, right? Even though it doesn't mention explicitly here, the Torah doesn't have to because it's clear. And his owners put to death as well. Okay, so here we have a situation where you have a dangerous animal, like a pit bull, right? You have a pit bull. You know the pit bull can do damage. Okay, you're walking the pit bull down the street, not on a leash, and it goes, attacks a baby carriage and kills a baby. you're responsible. You know this is a dangerous animal. Okay, so the situation specifically here is you have an ox. The ox has in the past gored somebody. Perhaps the implication is gored somebody to death. You didn't take any care to now prevent this from happening again. You didn't fence it in or tie it up or whatever you have to do, or put it in the barn, and it goes and kills somebody. You're responsible because you knew this was a dangerous animal. Okay. Again, these are points. These are the laws. We have to understand these as bullet points for helping judges determine day-to-day cases that are going to have specific circumstances, specific pieces of evidence. Each case is to be determined on its own merits, but these give general guidelines, which are to give the idea of how to think about determining cases. Okay. All right. Verse 30. Im kofer yushat alao, v'natan vidio nasho, kichol asher yushat alao. Okay, so this is important. So it says that the owner should be put to death, is put to death, or shall be put to death, but it doesn't mean shall be put to death. Okay, why? Because the owner, why should he be put to death? He didn't intend to kill. He didn't intend that his dangerous animal and kill the other person. He's just an idiot. He's ignorant. He's negligent, right? He's irresponsible and he's negligent, but he certainly didn't intend for his animal to kill the other person. So he shouldn't be put to death. We saw the only one that's put to death, okay, is okay. Is someone who, well, it's most clear in verse 14, okay, is someone who carried out premeditated murder, someone who intentionally killed an innocent person, okay? This person, the person whose dangerous animal killed somebody, certainly didn't intend, right? It's probably the last thing that person wanted to happen, right? Because now it just brings trouble upon him, right? Who would want their animal to kill somebody else, in a general situation? So therefore, it's clarified. Where was it? Oh, I skipped a couple of lines, but it doesn't matter. Okay, let's go back to where we were. Okay. So Ba'alav Yumat, okay, his owner should be put to death. Okay. I always like to point out that this is a very similar language, and what's one of my proofs for this? It's in, if I could find it now, let me just think. This is going to be 2 Samuel 15. No, 2 Samuel. Let's try 10. 12. Yeah, here it is. Okay, so this is the incident of Bathsheba. So Bathsheba, so David has now had relations with a married woman and then caused her husband to be killed deliberately caused her husband to be killed in battle. So this is as close as it gets to premeditated murder, but it's not really premeditated murder, right? Because David didn't hate Uriah the Hittite. This was a crime of passion. So really, this is kind of a form of second degree murder, right? And we know that second degree murder is it's murder. It's not like manslaughter where it's an accident, but it's a crime of passion. There's no hatred here. It's disgusting, but there's no hatred here. Okay. I guess you can make a case that it's first degree murder, right? Because it was premeditated in that sense, but it wasn't premeditated out of malice for Uriah the Hittite. It was premeditated out of David trying to save his own ass. So it's not found out what he did, namely sleep with Bathsheba, a married woman, right? All know the story, right? That's why he calls Uriah the Hittite back and tells him to go down to his house, and Uriah refuses a couple of times, and then finally Uriah sends a message with Uriah the Hittite. He has to carry his own message to Yoav, who we spoke about before in was it the 2 Kings chapter? I can't remember the chapter. Who is also later put to death by Solomon using using his hitman Benaiah. But at any rate, he sends a word through Uriah Hittite himself to Yoav that Yoav should put Uriah Hittite in the front lines and then withdraw and have him intentionally killed. We all know the story. At any rate, Nathan comes to David with the famous story about the little ewe lamb and basically says to David, let me find it here. Okay. So it's 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 5. Yaharaf Dawid ba'ish me'od v'yomer el Natan. So David, so this is in the analogy or in the allegory, okay? So David, when he finds out that the rich man has, in the allegory, it didn't actually happen, that the story that Nathan the prophet is telling David about, that this rich man had taken the beloved only ewe lamb of a poor man and cooked it up, then David says, what does David say? Yaharaf Dawid ba'ish. David became furious at the man. Oh, very furious at the man. Yomer el Natan, and said to Nathan, the prophet, Ha Yahweh, as Yahweh lives, he ben mavet ha'ish ha'osezot, that the person who did this literally is a son of death, but what it really means is deserves to die. Okay? So there, it's a similar language. It's clear as day, right? The person who did this deserves to die. Put him to death, right? That's what it seems to be saying. But no, what does the next verse say? ועת הכבשה ישלם 400 עקב אשר עשה את הדבר הזה ועל אשר לא חמל. But, and he should pay 4 times for the ewe lamb because of what he did, because he did this thing and that he had no feelings, no mercy towards the person, right? So what is it? Is he put to death or does he pay 4 times, right? If he's put to death, then paying the 4 times doesn't really matter anymore, right? So the implication is he deserves to die, ben mavet ha'ish, that this person deserves to die, but really the punishment, you can't kill him because you can't put a person to death for killing a lamb, as horrible as a thing it is, even a beloved lamb, because it's not a human being. The only time one is put to death is if they intentionally kill an innocent human being. So that person can't be put to death. He deserves death. He should be put to death, but the punishment is that he has to pay 4 times the worth of the lamb to this person. But David is furious. So he says that person deserves death. Okay, but what he has to do is pay 4 times. It's kind of similar to what we said at the beginning of the study, where we said there's the chatchila and bidiavad, that a lot of laws say what ideally should happen, but then what actually, if that can't happen, then what should happen? It's the same kind of language here that we mentioned at the beginning of the study. And I think it should happen. But you can't put someone to death because his animal killed somebody else. You can only put someone to death for premeditated or perhaps crime of passion, murder against an innocent person. Okay, but certainly not because the person was completely irresponsible, negligent, and caused the death of someone else. Yes, it's a horrible thing, but that doesn't mean that he himself should be put to death because he did not intend that his animal should kill the other person. Okay. Yeah, I know about that, Prince No Name. You can, by the way, you can find, so Prince No Name says, Salam, listening for a while. Thank you for the video. Unfortunately, last week's video was copyright claimed and blocked to me in the UK. I know it was because I played some American music. I did not do this time. However, you can watch last week's video it was blocked on YouTube, but it was not blocked on Facebook. And I'd have to dig up the link. If you give me 1 second, I'll dig up the link. 1 second. So that's Mishpatim, that's Yitro. Here. So you can find, if you really want to watch last week's video, I mean, as if the study isn't long enough already, but if you have that desire, you can find last week's here. Last week's video on Facebook. Okay, there you go. Okay, so where were we? Right. So he deserves to die, but he's not going to die. Im kofer yishat alav v'natan, and here we said kofer. Kofer means monetary recompense. It basically, I'm not going to get into the whole thing here. I've covered it in my article on Yom Kippurim on Karaite Insights, but it basically means covering up the eyes of someone else so that they forget that this bad thing happened. Okay, so im kofer yishat alav. So v'natan pidion nafsho kechol asher yishat alav. So basically, the person whose relative has died now, right? This is ostensibly the Goel Adam, who instead of, he's not allowed to go kill the other person, but he could say, okay, you pay, you owe me money then, you pay, okay? So again, a dangerous animal, an animal that's known to be dangerous, kills somebody, that person, the owner of that animal should die, but he's not put to death because that owner did not commit premeditated murder. It was negligent and a horrible accident, or not even an accident, a horrible incident, but it was not premeditated murder, so he is not put to death. What he has to do instead is pay monetary compensation as, and I think the implication here, as the relatives of the person who died request. So, okay, your pit bull killed my daughter. You really should, I really feel like killing you. You should be put to death. You deserve death, okay? But I can't put you to death because you didn't do it. But your disgusting pit bull did it. So your pit bull is now put to death, right? That's what we have above, right? That the animal's put to death. And you pay me $5 million, okay, for my pain and suffering, for my loss and my pain and suffering. That's basically what this verse is saying, okay? Verse 31, O ben yigah, o bat yigah, k'mishpat hazeh ya'aseh lo. So I'm not sure exactly what this is adding. So this is, I guess, this is talking again. If it's someone's son or daughter that was gored to death, then again, it's solidifying the implication that it's the Goel Adam, that's the nearest of kin, that is going to collect the recompense. Okay, but we can look at commentary, and then we're going to end the study, I think, because it's already late. Im eved yigah hashor or ama kesef 30 shekalim yiten la'adonav v'ashor yisakel. So it's the same thing, okay? If it's a okay, I see what's going on. So if it's a ben or a bat, so if it's a son or a daughter, then it's okay. So why does it mention a man or a woman? Okay, so this is probably, you might think that if it's a son or a daughter, meaning a young person, again, I'm speculating here, we'd have to look at some of the commentary, that maybe you're going to pay less. The person who's responsible is going to pay less to the parents because the son or the daughter is valued as less, and we have in other places, one other place in the Torah where this value is given for adults, children, slaves, etc. At any rate, maybe that's what this is implying here. Okay, but then it's saying that even if it's a son or a daughter, and then it's the same idea. It's the same law as above. Okay. However, if it's a servant, then the matter is laid out. Okay. Again, so literally it says in verse 32, if the shore should maul to death, should gore to death, a man or a maidservant, then the owner of the animal, the owner of the bull, of the ox, has to pay 30 shekels. And that's the implication is 30 shekels of silver. When it doesn't mention otherwise, and it usually applies silver. Okay, so he pays 30 shekels to who? To the owner of the servant. Okay, Vashodi Yisakel, and again, because he killed the human being, the ox is put to death. So some people incorrectly say that this shows that a slave is nothing but property. That's a load of baloney. That's not what this law shows at all. Okay, in all cases, the ox, whether it's a man or a woman, son or a daughter, okay, or a slave, in all cases, the ox who did it is killed and not eaten. Owner could be put to death, but is not put to death because he's going to instead get out of his deserving death by paying monetary compensation. Okay, the only difference is the amount of monetary compensation that he has to pay. So in the case of a man or a woman, whatever I'm assuming here, and this is the way it's usually understood, whatever the aggrieved party requests, say $5 million. In the case, if it's a son or a daughter, meaning a younger man or a woman, maybe a child, the same thing, whatever the aggrieved party requests. And if it's a case of a slave, then the price is set at 30 shekels of silver. It's 30 talents of silver. Okay, the price is set. It's a lower price ostensibly, probably, than if it were a man, woman, boy, or girl, but still there is monetary compensation. Still, the animal is put to death. The animal is not eaten. Still, the owner of the animal deserves to be put to death, but is not put to death because it was not premeditated murder. But still, the owner of the animal has to pay monetary compensation. The only difference between the three situations is how much monetary compensation he has to pay, and there's no implication whatsoever that the slave is just treated as a piece of property, a piece of meat, and that the slave's death is somehow okay. In all cases, the owner is not put to death, and the owner has to pay monetary compensation, and the animal is put to death. So it's equivalent for man, woman, boy, girl, or slave. The only difference is the amount of money that the offending animal owner has to pay. Okay, so with that, I think we're going to end. It's pretty late here. One of my cats is, what the heck, Susie girl? What are you doing? Do you really think you can climb into the sink and start licking out of the bowl?
Can I feed her now?
You are being very bad. Yeah, you can feed Sufi. And where's Lavi?
And what do I do with her after I feed her?
Whatever you want. Okay, I'm putting her outside. I'm going to end the study now. Anyway, dinner. Okay, so I wish we had more time to go on, but these are very detailed laws. There's a lot. They're hard to understand. You read the commentaries, you're going to get a million different opinions about the laws because they're hard to understand. But if I could sum up one thing, I'll sum up what I said at the beginning of the study, is that these are, to quote Professor Joe Baden of Yale University, who's the link to whose series I posted at the beginning of the study. These laws are meant to be at best, what was the word he used again? At best, illustrative. Okay, at best, illustrative. They're meant to give an idea of how to approach ancient Israelite jurisprudence. They're meant to be bullet points. They're meant to be points of consideration for how judges, who we saw again in Exodus, was it 17, 19, I think, or 18, I can't remember now. Judges, God-fearing, valorous, God-fearing men of truth who hate graft are supposed to judge cases. These are supposed to be bullet points for how they should go about judging cases, but every case is to be judged by the judges, by the hierarchy of judges, starting from the judge in the gates. And you could say maybe there's multiple layers there. The judges, the rulers over tens, the rulers over 50s, the rulers over hundreds, the rulers over thousands, ending with the head judge, which was Moshe in the time of when the Israelites traveled into the desert. So Moshe died. And later on, the judges that are mentioned in the book of Judges, and then later on, the kings serve as the judges, even though they were not prophets. They had accompanying prophets, so that's the way they were able to communicate with God if they couldn't solve the case themselves. In all of these cases, the judges are supposed to understand or internalize the mode of thought that is presented in laws like this, in this parsha, in Parshat Mishpatim, and they're supposed to use them as bullet points to consider the specific details of individual cases and come to judgments that are fair and render fair, wise, and honest and honorable judgments. And that's the way that these laws have to be understood, okay? Not as these laws cover every possible situation that could possibly come up in life, because no written text could ever do that. Not even the Rabbi's Talmud does that, right? Even the rabbis have to take the laws of the Talmud and extrapolate using their own judgment to specific cases. So basically, they're just using the Talmud as an extended, or not only the Talmud, the Mishnah, the Talmud, the books of Halakha. They're just basically using it as an extended, and boy, is it extended, because Asot Sfarim and Kates, there's no end to the number of books that were made. But they basically just use it as an extended written Torah, but nonetheless, they are judging cases based on the individual using their extended written Torah, which they call the oral Torah, but it's not oral, it's written, right? It's all written down. So their extended written Torah, they're using it the same way that we Karaites would use the original Torah. They're taking the laws that are written there and they're using them as kind of bullet points to figure out the laws of individual cases. If you have a mathematical background, I would say it's the difference between countable infinity and non-countable infinity. Okay, so the written laws represent countable infinity, which means that there are these kind of bullet points, and actual cases represent uncountable infinity. They're all the points between any 2 points that is infinite, right? So any 2 points on a number line have an infinite amount of points between them, and if you take any of the 2 points between those 2 points, they'll also have an infinite amount of points between them. It doesn't matter how many finite points you have on a number line, there are always an infinite amount of points in between them. And that's the difference between, shall we say, a written law, whether it's the Tanakh, as we Karaites use, or whether it's the entire rabbinical written opus. Opus may be the wrong word. The entire rabbinical corpus is the word I was looking for. Nonetheless, those are just individual points, and every individual case is going to be, there are going to be infinite amount of individual cases between those finite points. So really, the rabbis lie when they say they have an oral law. They really just have an extended written law, and they nonetheless use that extended written law, believing that somehow they're able to come to better conclusions on individual cases, which they have to judge, than we who call ourselves Karaites and who really essentially use the written law as the original written law, as the 5 books of Moses, to ultimately judge cases. Either way, we're both doing the same thing. I can get into a long tirade about how what the rabbis do is actually going to end up distorting the ability to judge individual cases, because their extended written law, which they call the oral law, is already a distortion of the original Torah, because it was done under the societies or the reigns of the philosophies, foreign philosophies, whether it's Roman times, Greek times, Babylonian times out east. Nonetheless, they came out with this weird extended written law, which they incorrectly call an oral law, and so therefore their ability to judge individual cases using this extended incorrect written law is going to be strange, and it's going to come out with strange conclusions. We, on the other hand, Karaites have never done that. We've always used our written law as the original written law. So therefore, hopefully, if we have wisdom as judges, then when we adjudicate individual cases, then we're going to be able to do so in a more correct way, because we're not using a distorted written law, which the rabbis lie or incorrectly say is an oral law. I hope that kind of made sense. If you understood, you understood. If not, no big deal. It's not it is a main point, but it's a little bit hard to describe unless you have some background in the differences between Karaite Judaism and Rabbinical Judaism. Okay, with that, I'm going to end the study for today. Before I do, any last chance for any questions or comments? Going once, going twice, gone. All right, everybody. Thank you all for joining me in the study. Be'ezrat Yahweh. We'll do it again next week. And in the meantime, I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom and or a Shavua Tov, wherever you are in the world. And we'll see you again next week. We'll go out with a little bit of music. And Shabbat Shalom, Shavua.
God.